Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. That's Ryan Roberts. I'm Brian Driscoll. We're getting a little bit of a late start today because Ryan, I had some intel that I had to finish writing up. I've spent the last couple weeks digging in with as many sources as I could to get as much team intel as possible. We dropped a big offensive intel last night. Dropped the offensive one or defense that was on the offense. We dropped the defensive one today around 1. Finally got it done around 1. So we're getting a little bit of a late start, but that doesn't stop us, baby. We're going to keep talking Notre Dame football. And as we have discussed, we're going to stick with the offense today. A little bit of a primer, however, we have 2 more shows coming up today. At 6 p.m. tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk will go live with Sean Stiers. They are going to talk about potential breakout players for Notre Dame. I believe it's going to be Vince again tonight. I'm not 100% sure. Vince will let me know if that's true or not, but I believe it's going to be Vince with Sean tonight. And then immediately following that at 7:30, we will go live to cover the pending decision by 2023 linebacker Jaden Ausberry, the number 38 player in the country, according to ESPN. Big time player. And so we'll discuss all of that tonight in our 7:30 show. But today, Ryan, we're going to focus on the Notre Dame offense. And, we've kind of done strengths and then question marks and then strengths and now question marks as we look at the offense. And at the end of the day, the difference between this being a good offense and a really good, potentially great offense is going to be to the beginning of the foundation of the strengths playing to that level, and then the concerns being answered in a positive manner, the questions being answered in a positive manner. If Notre Dame can address these questions and turn them into at least, either strengths, but at the very least, just like, hey, they're solid there, then I think this offense has a chance to be pretty good. How quickly those things kind of rise up from just okay to strengths is going to determine if this offense can take that final leap and be one capable of putting a team on its back and saying, hey, let's go win a title.
Yeah, I think we talked about it yesterday, Brian, that the defense has a little bit more of a smaller gap between what we conceive as the floor and what maybe the ceiling is with that group. This one is the complete opposite, where we have high expectations, but there's also a little more volatility, right? So like if things don't develop, this group might not be nearly what we think it can be, but it could also be spectacular. So there is a wider margin between the floor and the ceiling, in my opinion, on this unit, but there is a lot of explosiveness. We're going to see explosiveness. Just the question of that I talked about yesterday was, is it going to be efficient explosiveness? That's what I'm looking forward to see, because there is a lot of talents. There is so much. It's just a lot of it is sophomores. Like, if we're being honest, like that's
Right.
the class that is very dependent offensively, especially quarterback, both tackles, wide receiver. There is running backs. There is so many sophomores where you've seen flashes, but just how tangible is it going to be now heading into 2022? So it's exciting for us to talk about. And I also want to put it out there, when you say that we're talking about the questions, I think most people now get in their minds of it's a negative thing, right? Question marks do not necessarily have to be a negative thing.
Sometimes they're just unknowns.
100%. I mean,
right.
Again, like I said I think I said it on two days ago or 3. I forget. These shows are so great that they all blend together at this point. But Isaiah Foskey going into last year was a question mark, right? Like we thought that he could be really good,
right?
But also we hadn't seen a ton
Had to
of
prove
it
it
yet,
right?
Exactly. So until he puts it on his resume, he is a question mark. Question marks don't have to be a negative. It's just uncertain at this point. To your point.
And, when you look at this offense, Ryan, to me, we're talking about a group that didn't play well last year and still scored 35 points a game, partly because they didn't play very good defenses for most of the year. That doesn't necessarily change a whole lot this year. They played a couple really good defenses last year. I thought Wisconsin's defense was pretty darn good for most of last year. I thought that Cincinnati's defense was really good. I mean, even Bama scored – how many points did Bama score on them? Like 24, 20, something like that? And
something like that, yeah.
Ran on them but didn't score a lot. And you look at it and say, well, outside of Clemson, is there a lot of proven really good defenses on the schedule again this year? And I would say no. So
No.
I think the way to evaluate it could be misleading. I mean, you can't just look at, oh, they're averaging 36, 37 points a game. Well, I mean, there's some teams on the schedule you don't have to play all that great against to hang a 40-50 spot on, if we're going to be completely honest.
Mhm.
So that part needs kind of some nuance. It's not a statistical improvement. It's not, okay, they've got to average X number of yards rushing and X number of yards per play and, complete X number of percentage of their passes. It's going to be about dominance. And that's the standard we're referring to. Like some of the questions we have, I have no concerns about any of these groups, not about any of these groups playing poorly. That's not the question anymore. The only big negative concern I have is health, because, and that's kind of the first one to start with, is, you already have two veterans that are out, right? At least we're out for most of the spring and summer. I don't know where Avery Davis is in his return to health. We expect him back this fall, expect him back for fall camp, but we don't have definitive word on that. Joe Wilkins seems like he might be out for a little bit. Again, Notre Dame hasn't told us kind of when he's going to be back, but he's going to be out, probably for a little bit because he got injured again in the spring. Mitchell Evans is going to be out for most of the season. Jadarian Price is out already for the season. Logan Diggs is a bit of a bit of a concern, but we had some interesting news on, how early he may be back in that intel piece last night. But the point is, there's some injury concerns. Jarrett Patterson tore his pec, right before the spring. So, where would he be? So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. To me, that's the only thing that could make this an average to below average offense, would just be a rash of injuries. So I think the baseline is just, it's going to be good, but good gets you 10-2 against the schedule. It doesn't get you to the playoff. It doesn't beat Ohio State and Columbus. It doesn't get you victories in the postseason. The standard is higher than that. And you've got the coaching in place, the talent in place, but the one thing to me that can derail it all is health. This team has to be able to stay healthy, and that includes getting guys back and making sure they don't add to the injuries that they've already sustained.
I mean, injuries is something where for most teams it would be very tough to, get out of the hole at certain spots, right? But we have seen some teams where injuries completely derail, and I'm not even talking from a Notre Dame perspective. I'm talking just from a national perspective. Like some injuries can completely derail a football team, and some that you can kind of get past it and at least supplement that production a little bit, right? And I think that the reason that health is so important for me, Brian, on the offensive side of the football is two of the positions that we've been talking about so much about lack of depth, right? When I think about wide receiver and running back, dependent on when Logan Diggs does eventually come back for sure, those are the positions where I'm just like, if there's an injury at wide receiver or two, then you're in a tough spot, right? If Logan Diggs is not back fully healthy by the start of the fall season, and then you have another injury in the running back room, and that's tough, man. It's just the lack of bodies is even more of a thing where I'm just a little worried. I mean, because that is, if you ask me, what are the spots on this team that have the least amount of depth entering the fall practice, those would be two of the right near the top, right? Especially the wide receiver room. So injuries, just in general, there's always going to be a little bit of a downgrade to a degree as far as the level of talents.
Right.
But especially when we're talking about a couple positions on the Notre Dame offense where you just don't have a lot of numbers. It's not even that you don't have quality of, it's not that you don't have quality of talent behind some of these players. It's that you just don't have a lot of numbers right now, especially at wide receiver.
I think quarterback is one where there's a big concern of a drop off behind Tyler Buckner if he goes down. Well, my answer to that is that just depends on how well Tyler Buckner plays. And that kind of leads us into concern number two. It's the quarterback position. And again, what's the standard we're referring to? Do either of us have any concern about, gee, is Tyler Buckner going to be able to handle being a starter at Notre Dame? No. Is Tyler Buckner going to be bad? No. Tyler Buckner is going to be at least a solid player in our view. Like, to me, as long as he's healthy, that's a given. But that's not the standard at Notre Dame, Ryan. We've said that. Look, the standard we hammered Brian Kelly for not getting to is the same standard that Marcus Freeman's going to be held to, and the same standard Marcus Freeman is holding himself and his team to. He said that from day one. The question is can you take that next step? And one of the things that's been holding Notre Dame back, in my opinion, in the last several years, on top of not having good coaching at certain spots, because that right there is why I don't think any of these groups are going to be bad, because I think there's a minimum solid coaching at every spot. There's solid coaching and good talent at every spot, so they're at least going to be solid. The question is can you play at a level that allows this team to take that next step as a program? And that's the level of quarterback play that has been missing. When Brandon Wimbush was on in 2017, that offense went through a stretch of over a month where it just was unstoppable. I mean, literally unstoppable. I mean, they just were dominating really good football teams. When Ian Book first took over as a starter in 2018, and he was really clicking, completing over 70% of his passes, just getting the ball out, super efficient offense. That Notre Dame team was hard. They had to play really bad, like against Pitt in 2018, for it to even be a competitive game until they then went down. And that's the thing for me is they kind of went as the quarterback went, if we're being honest.
Sure.
And that's going to be true for this team because Notre Dame has tremendously improved its talent in spots, but they're still not to the position where they can go out and win a championship with a Stetson Bennett type of player. And that's no disrespect to Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett had some big plays last year, including in the title game, but he's not in the same league as Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow and Mac Jones and players like that. That's not an insult to him. That's just reality. Notre Dame's not there where they can win with Stetson Bennett. They need a quarterback that can be a playmaker. So as we talk about, can this offense be good enough to go into Columbus and help this team win? Can the offense be good enough to go against what we expect to be an elite Clemson defense? Can it go out to LA at the end of the year and outscore USC? Can it get to the postseason and move the ball and score on Georgia and Alabama and teams like that? That's a big question mark still, and it starts at quarterback.
Sure.
And so that's kind of why this is a question mark, is how good can Tyler Buckner actually be? Now, Ryan, the intel piece we had last night, I'm sorry I'm being a tease, but I was excited about it as I got it because I got it from multiple sources. And the teaser to it is there's a lot of people that are like, I think people are going to be surprised how good this kid is. They've always liked him, but he's really taken things to another level this offseason. And if that continues when the pads come on, you start getting a little bit excited. But that's the key, right, Ryan? I don't care what a guy looks like in shorts. It's all great. It's great intel, but none of it really truly matters until you get out there and can do it with the pads on against the defense we expect Notre Dame to have this season.
So, Brian, you said there's some intel out there on some type of board. Where can someone go to find this type of great information? Oh, yeah, it's under at sports.irishbreakdown.com. You should go there right now if you are a loyal listener and you have not checked out the intel. Because like Brian said, great information on offense yesterday. I combed through the defense like a half an hour before I go on here. It's fantastic stuff, man. Really incredible. I remember when Brian called me yesterday with all the intel. I was like a kid in a candy store, man, just trying to get all this information. So definitely go sign up there. But Brian, I mean, to your point, right? Again, this is why I started this whole thing off with question marks don't have to be necessarily negative, in my opinion, because I don't think Tyler Buckner is going to be a below average to bad quarterback, right? Like I think he's going to be a good football player this year. The question is he just a good player this year, and then he builds off of it, and then he becomes a really good player in 2023? Or do we start to see a little bit of superstar this year, right? A guy that can carry an offense, because I expect him to be a just headache for defensive coordinators with his ability to be a passer and to be a runner. That dual threat aspect, I think, is going to drive people absolutely crazy. And that's going to drive people absolutely crazy whether he is a great football player or he's just a good football player, because his athleticism is always going to be there and his ability to throw the football is always going to be there. But the question that I have is he just going to be a function, a part of the offense with a good offensive line and good skill position? Is he just going to be a good player and just kind of fit in there? Or is he going to be at one point before his season got delayed and all that, his season got canceled his senior year, I wouldn't be shocked if he would have eventually been a 5-star quarterback if he would have had a dominant senior year, right?
I had him as a 5-star, but the Elite 11 performance, and it's not the performance mattered, it's that he changed his throwing motion, and now it became a bit of an unknown, and then he didn't play senior year. He just didn't have the experience. He was still a 4.5-star kid for me, which is a top 50 player, but I think you're absolutely right. I wasn't the only person that had him as a 5-star after his junior year. And it's just the last thing that a lot of people had was that Elite 11 performance where he was working on a throwing motion change for some reason. And
Sure.
then that's kind of what everybody used for their evaluation. But I believe you're right, Ryan, because he was also transferring to a higher level. He was going to play at Helix High School in San Diego, which would
Yep.
have allowed him to play against better competition, and he would have dominated there as well. And I do agree that he would have been at the very least a top 35 player in my view.
Yeah.
And I think that took a lot of the shine because he was kind of out of the spotlight for a while. I
Sure
do think
was.
it took some of the shine off of him. And then, of course, he didn't play like Trevor Lawrence last year. And so that caused some other people to think he's not, he's not all that. But, there's no doubt the kid. I mean, I had two sources say this, like, man, this is one of the best kids Notre Dame's had in a long time. When he's on, this kid's dynamic. Teams are going to have nightmares. I mean, these are things that people are saying about him.
Yep.
Well, that you could say that's hyperbole, but like that's kind of what we thought Tyler Buckner would be coming out of high school. It's just, it's nice to hear that we're starting to see that. But as you circle back, Ryan, can Tyler do that with his pads on? I think that's a greater question mark.
And I mean, his first start ever is going to be going to the Horseshoe against Ohio State. So this is something where I have a lot of confidence in Tyler Buckner, Brian, because I know we've talked about this before. But the kid seems like a really resilient kid, right? Like he doesn't seem like he ever gets too high. It doesn't seem like he ever gets too low. He just kind of has an even keel demeanor to him, which I think even when he's struggling, and this is a big trait for quarterbacks. Like let's forget about arm strength, anticipation, athleticism, size. Like let's throw that out for the window for a second. There's a lot of quarterbacks that get the most out of their ability because they can handle when things go wrong and they just keep working through it and it doesn't bother them, right? And I think that Tyler Buckner has some of that moxie to him. And if he has that mental capacity to be able to work through some of those trials and tribulations with the talent level he has, I think he's going to be a really good quarterback. But again, it's an unknown. Just like the Marcus Freeman thing, right? Like we haven't seen Marcus Freeman really coach in a game yet where we can have a honest evaluation of him. We had the bowl game last year. I don't think it's a fully honest evaluation because now this is a completely new staff, full-time coach. All like we 100% have a absolute understanding where he stands with this program moving forward and has his guys around him. This is an honest evaluation now of Tyler Buckner. Forget about the simplified, role that he had last year as a Wildcat quarterback. This is an opportunity for him, and I think he has the mental makeup. I know he has the talent. It's just about what version are we going to get this season. That's the only question I have with Tyler Buckner.
And I would phrase, I agree with you. I would phrase mine a little differently. We're going to see the Tyler Buckner that we thought was going to be a 5-star this year. The question is how much are we going to see that? And I think that's kind of, like there were times last year, Ryan, you've watched Bryce Young, and you're like, he looked like a redshirt freshman, especially when he lost his receivers, his stud receivers in the title game, which is going to happen to most quarterbacks, much less a redshirt freshman. So even a guy like Bryce Young, who was tremendous last year, I mean, just a special player. I'm very high on Bryce Young as a player. He even had some moments where it's good that he had some guys around him that were really, really good players because he looked like a redshirt freshman who was still learning the game. It's going to be no different for Tyler Buckner. I think the question mark for me more than anything, beyond can he stay healthy and answer the bell every single week, is going to be the consistency aspect. And we've talked about this before this summer. Can he not just game to game, but throw to throw and series to series? Can he consistently be that kind of player? But part of the reason there's some excitement about him is because he doesn't have to be right all the time as a passer to still have a big impact in the game. And I think that's the thing that really has created a lot of excitement with a lot of people, is the fact that, look, he can be off and there's still things Tommy Rees can do to use him to impact the game and to help him kind of get over those slumps. Where like last year, if the receivers weren't getting off press and the O-line wasn't pass blocking, wasn't a whole lot you could do about it. As much as I respect and love Jack Cohn, if those things weren't going, Jack couldn't make plays because he wasn't that kind of playmaker. And that's the thing about Tyler Buckner is he can. If certain aspects of the offense aren't going well, he can step up and make those plays based on his talent. Now he's got to go out and show that he can do that consistently. And I think that's the big question mark.
100%.
And then number 2, Ryan, and I'm going to tie these kind of together a little bit. The number 3, I guess I should say question mark, because the health part kind of encompasses all of this, is the perimeter playmakers. And you and I agree that there's talent here. we've talked about Lorenzo Styles is a talented player. Braden Lindsey, what he brings to the table. I mean, I continue to hear rave, some absurd statements about Tobias Merriweather from the summer. Like to the point where like, all right, come on, man. Like I had to ask somebody once, like, come on, man. Like seriously, like me. Like I don't need sunshine blowing up my what. And he's like, dude, no, seriously. Like this kid's the real deal. All right, cool. So that's great. There's talent there, but the injury concerns, the lack of numbers is a concern. But the other part is as much as we think Lorenzo Styles can be really good, you had a very bold prediction about Lorenzo Styles earlier in the summer. As much as I think Tobias Merriweather, who I've said I would argue is the best receiver they've signed since Michael Floyd back in 2008, that's a bold statement that I've made about him. As much as we talk about the upside and potential for Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas and all these different guys, Braden Lindsey, none of them have proven that they can be the guy, especially in big moments. Lorenzo had a really nice bowl game. That's great. But can he continue that in when the games maybe matter a little bit more? Not that the Fiesta Bowl doesn't matter, but it was end of the season. You're going through a coaching change. It just wasn't the same as what's going to be going on in Columbus on September 3rd or in Clemson in November and those type of scenarios. So that's the thing for me is can the perimeter playmaker step up? And, there was kind of a debate raging during the chat and about somebody had made a comment that, Notre Dame fan had made a comment that look, Notre Dame's roster just isn't where Ohio State's is right now. I'm like, well, it depends on what position group you're talking about, right? And I know Ohio State fans on YouTube in all their crazy comments think that they're just better everywhere and they should beat everybody they play by 50. But the reality is there's some positions where Notre Dame is better than Ohio State. But these two positions are why that perception exists. I would not trade Notre Dame's secondary for Ohio State's secondary. I'd think about a couple guys, but not as a whole. I would not trade Notre Dame's linebackers for Ohio State's linebackers. I would not trade Notre Dame's defensive line for Ohio State's defensive line. I would not trade Notre Dame's offensive line for Ohio State's offensive line. I would not trade Notre Dame's tight ends for Ohio State's tight ends. But there's two positions where there is a perceived and a real, right? The perception comes from the reality of just the lack of provenness of this. There's the perceived gap is here, quarterback and perimeter playmakers. That's where you look at Ohio State and you're like, Heisman finalist at quarterback, who was a redshirt freshman last year, who threw 0 passes his freshman year, by the way. And then you look at the receiver position where even though they lost 2 top 15 draft picks, they still returned the guy who led the team in catches and yards last year and who ended the season when those guys were gone with a 300-yard game, right? Now, we know that there's a little bit of an asterisk, but okay, if Utah was healthy, he'd had what, 180? You know what I mean? Like it was still a dominant performance. That when we talk about how banged up Utah was, it's not to say, oh, he would have had 3 catches for 27 yards if they were healthy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, no, it would have been like maybe like 8 catches for 150, right? Which is still really good. And then you've got some young, talented guys stepping into the equation. But there's an assumption at Ohio State that's earned that, they lost guys, but dudes are just going to step into the mix. That assumption isn't there at Notre Dame. I actually think it should be because even with poor coaching, we saw Will Fuller leave and Equanimous St. Brown stepped into the mix. We saw EQ leave and Miles Boykin and Chase Claypool stepped up. And Miles goes to the NFL, Chase becomes a stud. Chase leaves if Javon McKinley breaks out and has a year. Javon leaves, Kevin Austin steps in and plays really, really well. So we've seen that kind of happen in Notre Dame. But it's not to the level, with the exception of Chase Claypool and Will Fuller, to what the Ohio State kids have produced. But I think there's an assumption at Ohio State that they're going to have 3-4 guys that are really, really good, a great quarterback, and that's valid. That's true. That we accept that. I think until Notre Dame can prove that this group at quarterback and skill players, which the reason the perception about Notre Dame's overall talent persists is because there is no more recognizable group of players from a fan standpoint than the quarterback and the guys he's throwing to.
Sure.
That's just the reality. And so even though I just said I would not, and I think most people in the chat know I'm a pretty objective guy. I'm going to be wrong, but I'm a pretty objective guy. I don't just blindly say Notre Dame's better everywhere, but I just ran through all these positions where I would not trade Notre Dame's players for Ohio State's. And people think there's this huge talent gap. Why, Ryan? Quarterback, receiver. That's the question mark.
You're not wrong. And it's a shame too, Brian, because honestly, I'm especially thinking of wide receiver for a second. I know the numbers aren't where what you want it to be, right? And we've talked about, the recruiting woes, especially this last cycle, obviously only getting one with Tobias Merriweather and some other guys transferring in previous classes. So the number isn't what we want. But I am going to make a statement here that I think a lot of people are going to disagree with, and it's fine. I don't think that the gap in talent at wide receiver at the top, Notre Dame to Ohio State, is drastic. Do I think Ohio State has more talent in the wide receiver room? Yes, I do. I think that the development of those players is what is
Mhm.
super lacked because I don't think that Ohio State, I don't think that like Jackson Smith and Jigba for a second, right? Great football player. Is he that much more physically gifted than Lorenzo Styles Jr.? I would push
Okay.
back on that. I would push back on that 100% of the time. Now, would I trade Ohio State's receivers for Notre Dame's in a vacuum? Yes, but it's not
Right.
an easy conversation for me, right?
Right.
Well, my point is that Notre Dame has talent, and it's not that far off from Ohio State level talent at the wide receiver position. The biggest difference is that Brian Hartline has developed his guys, and they are fantastic football players. Notre Dame's wide receivers have not been developed properly, and that's not
Right.
just this group. Like, I mean, you could take Chase Claypool had a great last year, but I think he was underdeveloped for the most part of his
Brian, he
career,
did
right?
what he did because he was way bigger, better, faster, more athletic than anyone he faced. I mean,
100%.
it was talent. So I guess the only thing I would disagree with you on that is I get where you're coming from, and I don't disagree this year. I think we would both agree that last year was a different story because Garrett Wilson was
Oh,
a
100%.
different kind of
100%.
player.
Yes.
But
Garrett
this year
Garrett
you look
Wilson's
at
a
it,
Garrett. You don't have a Garrett Wilson on this roster for Notre
no,
Dame.
I don't
Nowhere
believe
near.
so.
100%. 100%.
Where I
Don't
would
disagree with
say
that.
that I'm more confident in the Ohio State group is number one, they have proven that they can get these guys ready to play. I have confidence in Chancey Stuckey, but he has to prove it. He's been a football coach for 1 year. The other part to me is the depth there. I mean, you're talking about you've got guys between Jackson Smith and Jigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka comes back. You've got Julian Fleming, who supposedly is healthy now and ready to play. And then you've got this great freshman class coming in. And some of the guys that get all the hype in that freshman class aren't even my favorite players, right? I mean, a lot of people talk about Caleb Burton. I ranked him fourth of their receivers coming in.
Wow.
That's because I like some of the other guys. I'm very high, on the kid they got from Chicago last year, Caleb Brown. I'm very big on the kid they got from Georgia. I'm very big on Keon Graves, the kid they got from Arizona. Like, it's a really good receiving core. That's the difference. Now, I would not rank any of those guys ahead of Tobias Merriweather. But if I'm playing in a 7-on-7 game and it's Tobias Merriweather and nobody else, and those four guys, guess who's going to win? The team with
Sure.
the four. And
Right.
so I think from a number standpoint, that's where Notre Dame still needs to get to. But I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that right now, I think that Ohio State's guys at the top are clearly more established. I think that they are a little bit higher level. Like, I put Marvin Harrison Jr. a little bit over like a Deion Colsey, for example. But is he better than Tobias Merriweather? I don't know. I don't think he is. But
I mean,
Marvin's year 2 and Tobias is year 1, right? And so
100%.
I think those are some of the areas where I say I would lean towards Ohio State, but it's not like it was last year or 2 years ago when it was even worse. Like when you had Jamison Williams there 2 years ago with those guys and he could get on the field. And you had Jackson Smith think about this 2 years ago. Jackson Smith and Jacob could barely get on the field. Jamison Williams could barely get on the field because how deep they were at wide receiver.
Right.
They're not quite there yet. Right now, I think in a couple years they will because there's as long as they don't lose guys, they're gonna have another one. But I for 2022, I get your point, Ryan. And you talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba, and he's 6 foot, 6'1", 185, 195 pounds, right? Similar to Lorenzo Styles. But look what he did Jackson Smith and Jigba had 95 catches for 1,606 yards last year and 9 touchdowns. It's a heck of a year.
Yep.
He had 10 catches for 49 yards the year before as a true freshman. 10 catches for 49 yards. But yet, if you ask a Notre Dame fan, they're going to tell you that Lorenzo Styles, who had 24, like Lorenzo Styles had well over twice as many yards, almost 3 times as many yards as Jackson Smith and Jigba did as a freshman against Oklahoma State.
Yep.
He almost topped that and then almost topped his season totals against Oklahoma State. And so, but there's the assumption that he won't break out because Notre Dame hasn't proven that their guys can step into those roles. And I do think that's a fair thing to discuss. Now, the person that I think kind of held that group back is no longer here.
Yep.
The reason I'm not as ready to jump on with that talent becoming production like I am the offensive line is because Coach Stuckey doesn't have the proven track record that Harry Hiestand has. Same thing
He's
with running
also an
back.
unknown. He's an
Right.
unknown. Like
Right.
there's a lot of unknowns.
There's more
Exactly.
production coming back at receiver, significantly more than there is at running back. But why did we put running back in there? Because I know Dylan McCullough has a decade plus long track record of turning guys into big time college football players.
100%.
And that's really where it comes from. So it's the combination of the lack of provenness of the receiving core and the lack of experience of Chancey Stuckey that makes me say, I just can't throw it there yet. They got a lot of guys that got to prove themselves right now. Braden Lindsey's got to prove himself. Lorenzo's got to prove himself that he can be that guy, that he can be that alpha that you're referring to. Tobias now has to show that what he did this summer without pads on can be translated when guys can hit him. Right now, I think it will, but that's a remain to be seen. So I think it's the unknown aspect of this and the lack of depth is the thing for me that remains a troubling part. But I do agree 100% with Ryan from this standpoint is I do think Notre Dame fans are dramatically underselling the talent that Notre Dame has. Do I think they have 5 future first-round draft picks? No. I think they have 2. I do. And I think there's some other guys that can, in their roles, can be really good players. Do I think Braden Lindsey can be a high draft pick? No, I don't. Do I think Braden Lindsey could be a difference maker for Notre Dame this year? Absolutely. And then you throw in the fact that they're going to have Michael Mayer to help take some of that burden off. The Ohio State receivers don't have that. They don't have Michael Mayer. And so then you get down to, for this team to be good, is the combination of Michael Mayer and Lorenzo Styles going to be as good as the combination of whatever the 1-2 punch is for Ohio State? And I think that's the big question mark. And that's where you say, okay, that's where I think Ohio State has the benefit of the doubt because they will have those guys step up because that's what they've always done. That's what they do. They just reload. And that's what great programs do. Lose Justin Fields, no problem. CJ Stroud steps right into the mix. And they've done that for years. They lose Dwayne Haskins, JT Barrett leaves, and Dwayne Haskins steps in, he's even better. Lose Dwayne Haskins, Justin Fields steps in and takes over. Lose Justin Fields, CJ Stroud steps in and takes over. Notre Dame doesn't get that benefit of the doubt of quarterback and shouldn't because they haven't earned it. And that's the difference. They have to earn that. And hopefully this year begins that process.
I agree completely. And I mean, even at wide receiver, Brian Hartline is on the short list of best receiver coaches in college football. Like, I mean, him, Holman, Wiggins out of Alabama, like these are the best developers of talent at that position. And Brian's done it in a very short amount of time. And I think you talked about it a little bit, Brian, in the past, that Hartline was also an unproven guy when he first got to Ohio State, right? Like he didn't have a track record, but he does now, certainly, right? Like he is just producing first rounder after first rounder after first rounder. Like it is just a ridiculous kind of a rate that they're going on at the position. So can Chancey Stuckey be a great receiver coach for Notre Dame? I think so. But again, we don't know that. It's the uncertainty that we keep talking about. The point that I was ultimately trying to make is that I don't think if Notre Dame does not have a good wide receiver room in 2022, I don't think it's because of a lack of talents. I think it's because underdeveloped, it doesn't get developed properly, or to the over-encompassing point was that there's just not a lot of numbers, right? And if there's injuries that happen or there's people that get stunted of growth, then we don't have a lot of depth to work from. There's just not a great number in the room.
And that's why I think Ohio State, to me, has a clear advantage over Notre Dame, is if Jackson Smith and Jigba goes down, there's a couple guys I could point to and say, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has the talent to become the dude.
Very fair.
I think Emeka has the talent to become the dude. I don't think that after Lorenzo and Tobias, neither of them are freshmen. After Lorenzo, there's not a non-freshman that I look at and say, I think that guy this year, and when I talk about Emeka and Marvin, it's this year. Sure. I think if they're thrust into a go-to role, they would be fine. Now, they're not being thrust into that because Jackson is back. But if he got hurt and Marvin Harrison had to become the guy, I think he'd have a 70-plus, 1,000-plus yard season. I think if Emeka was thrust into that role, he would have a big-time season. Maybe not quite that way because he still has a little bit of refinement needed, but the talent is outstanding. So I do think the top of the board talent is better at Ohio State. I do, but that's only if you're looking at receiver. Because if you put both teams' tight end rooms into this conversation, which is in practicality what would happen because they are part of the pass game, then we're having a different conversation because Lorenzo isn't Notre Dame's number one. Michael Mayer is. And that's kind of how I look at it. So that's kind of where I come from, Ryan. Is they need to show it. And
Sure.
To your Stuckey Hartline comparison, I mean, Chancey Stuckey actually has more experience than Brian Hartline had as a coach because Brian Hartline had 1 year as an offensive quality control assistant at Ohio State before he took over as their full-time coach.
Sure.
He, like Chancey Stuckey, had the NFL background. Like he played in the NFL. The NFL, I think, at receiver does prepare guys to be able to go teach it if you want to do it. I do. I think guys like Brian Hartline and Chancey Stuckey, who were not elite talents, right? They weren't, the physical gifted players of other guys. They had to really master their craft. And guys like that tend to transition really well to being coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And so our comments about Chancey Stuckey are not, he's not going to be good, or it's just, if we're being honest and objective analysts of this football team, you have to be willing to say, yes, I'm optimistic, but he's got to show it. And that's what we're going to find out this year. If these questions are answered favorably, this is the deal. If Tyler Buckner has everyone realizing, like, you know what, that he is that guy. Mm-hmm. If the receiving core plays to the level you say it can, and I don't necessarily, I'm not quite there with you, but we're not far off. You throw the tight ends, we're on the same page. If the pass catchers can be to that level, then yeah, we are talking about this offense being really, really good. I will just say I'm a little bit more cautious with my optimism at receiver than I am at other positions. That would be my only holdup, just because we've been here before with Braden Lindsey, right? I mean, I think he would tell you that, right? Like, we've been here before where this is the year he breaks out. Now, I think he will. But again, it's a show me game. This is a show me sport, man.
100%. Braden Lindsey has broken my heart more than any woman ever has. Okay.
And I honestly think much of it really wasn't his fault, to be completely honest with you. I don't think the kid was coach worth a darn.
I would love to see Braden Lindsey get a restart now, right? Like, imagine if he was a freshman this year or a younger player this year with a different coach. I would love to see just the career arc that he would have had in a different situation, if I'm being completely honest about it.
Yeah. So, again, I'm optimistic, but he's got to show me. I think Lorenzo can be the dude. I think we've seen this. We've seen sophomore receivers with way less production than Lorenzo had as freshmen become studs. And I've pointed this out before. Golden Tate had 6 catches as a freshman. Mm-hmm. Year 2, 58 for over 1,000. Will Fuller had 6 catches as a true freshman. Year 2 as a sophomore, over 70 for over 1,000 yards. Equanimity St. Brown had a grand total of 1 catch for like 8 or 9 yards as a true freshman in 2015. Breaks out the next year over 50 catches, over 900 yards. Would have been over 1,000 if they played the bowl game that year. I mean, we've seen this over and over and over again. Miles Boykin had like 13 career catches going into 2018. Javon McKinley had a small handful of catches going into the 2020. So we've seen this before. Kevin Austin went into last year with 6 catches? 6 career catches. And so none of them could match what Lorenzo did as a true freshman. I mean, Lorenzo had more production in one game than most of those guys had their entire freshman seasons. The only exception being Will Fuller had 6 catches for like 160 yards as a freshman. That's the only one that did have more production than what Lorenzo had in one game. But I think that the overall pessimism about the receiving core is warranted and valid. And that's why I think that position more than any other is you got to show me. I think Tobias Merriweather can be a stud. It's got to show me. I think Deion Colsey has a chance to be a really good football player this year. He's got to show me. Jaden Thomas is a guy that I hear tons of good stuff about. He's got to show me.
Too. Yes. We hear about it all the time about Jaden Thomas.
No matter who we talk to, he's got to show me. And Avery Davis has to just show me he can be back. That's the other concern. That's the one established, I know what that guy can do, and he's going to do it in big games, fella. But he's coming off a torn ACL. So that just adds to it. But the talent is there, and I think that's what continues to be the thing that I don't think everyone appreciates enough about this receiving core, Ryan,
Yep.
is there's more talent and athleticism and speed here that I think a lot of fans are willing to give him credit for. And I think it's a little bit of an understandable thing. But
Mhm.
part of it too is I do think this is where the whole BK PTSD thing came from, because what it really boiled down to at its heart is not wanting to get too excited because you don't want to have your heart broken.
100%.
That's really
Yeah.
what it boils down to. And, a friend of mine and I were talking the other day. He writes for another Notre Dame website, great guy. And we were talking about, he's a long time, went to Notre Dame, long time Notre Dame guy. And we were talking about just past games and why the Notre Dame crowd isn't loud. And we started talking like, 2018 for Michigan, that crowd was crazy loud. 2015 for Texas, it was crazy. I mean, so there's been those moments, and we're like, well, why is it not loud now? And it's like, well, partly because they haven't had really any good teams come to play. Clemson 2020 would have been insane if it wasn't for COVID. But it's just like the Cincinnati game last year I've mentioned, right? There just was no energy there. Like, this
Mhm.
is two undefeated top 10 teams. The winner has a clear path to the college football playoff, and
I
there's no
know.
energy because Notre Dame fans didn't want to get too excited because it was like, we've been here, we've done this before, and we know how this is going to end. And you know what? They were right. I think that's going back to Marcus Freeman and Tommy Rees. The biggest thing they have to overcome is, because I think this is also permeates in the program with the players too. They have to overcome that and say, hey, look, this isn't the way it used to be. There's a new sheriff in town. There's a new standard here. Tommy Rees, this is my offense, not BK's offense that he's letting me run. This is my offense. And
Right.
this is how we're going to go about our business. And he's got to be able to be that guy that says there's a new attitude, there's a new demeanor. And if Tommy Rees can get the offense to play with the demeanor that he played with,
Mhm.
they're going to be really good. Because here's the reality. Tommy Rees did not have much talent, but Tommy Rees was wicked smart, and he was one of the most competitive kids that Notre Dame had. If you could have given him some of the talent some of these other quarterbacks that Notre Dame have had, he'd have been a heck of a player. So if his personality can be the one that the offense adopts, not the one of the former head coach, that's a final reason why I have a lot of optimism. And we didn't talk about this yesterday, probably should have, is now that he's in charge, I really do believe that this offense is going to play with an edge, because Tommy Rees coaches with an edge because he played with an edge.
Sure
And that
did.
could help over answer some of these things as well, Ryan.
He had to play with an edge, to
Mhm.
your point. I mean, and this is really funny because I feel like we do think very similarly sometimes. Because I was about to bring up the fact that I think when we're talking about the development of the skill position, too, the outside receivers specifically is what we're talking about. Compared it to Ohio State, I talked about Brian Hartline a ton. We also need to talk a little bit about that. Ryan Day system's awesome, right? Like,
Mhm.
he understands how to get guys open and understands how to utilize skill sets. Absolutely. And we saw in the bowl game that I think that Tommy Rees also has that. I'm not going to say
Yeah.
he's going to be Ryan Day in the immediate future, because Ryan Day is a
Yeah.
very great offensive mind, there's no
Right.
doubt. But I think that as long as the Notre Dame wide receivers have taken a step from a fundamental perspective and they're playing confidently, I do have trust that Tommy Rees can take advantage of that and utilize them in ways that can take advantage of their skill sets. Are they all going to be this absolute studs that their talent says that they can potentially be this year? Probably not. I
Don't
mean,
need to
the
be.
law, yeah, exactly. Well, the law of averages would also say that that's not going to happen. But to your point, they don't need to be if your offensive system is to that degree. You can make so many things happen when you have the ability to get those ISOs, clear out, manufacture space, all those types of things that we've seen Ryan Day do. And we have seen in spurts Tommy Rees do. But I, like you, think that he was a little handcuffed at
Yeah.
points during his offensive coordinator career. So I'm excited to see him fresh, because he's a competitive person and he reads
Yeah.
everything, right? There's people in this chat and they can feel the way they want to feel, but they have doubts about Tommy Rees as an offensive coordinator.
Sure.
It's out there. And Tommy Rees sees that. He
I'm sure.
does.
Well, I know that he has people that at least show him stuff,
Yeah.
as much as he tries to, I think, stay out of that. But everything gets back, right? And the thing for me with Coach Rees is when you saw, I mean, the scheme in the first half was really good. I mean, they just shredded a really good Oklahoma State defense. But that
Mhm.
team was playing with some swagger.
Sure was.
I mean, you talk about the Ohio State matchup. Go back and watch Lorenzo Styles' first touchdown. The nickel guy that he smoked for a touchdown is supposed to be Ohio State starting nickel this year. Just letting you know.
Tanner McAllister.
Yeah. I mean, he was covering him on a post route, and Lorenzo just ran by him. That guy's going to be starting against him in the first game of the year as well. Right. And so, but that team played with an edge. Where they lost the game is because they then, in the second half, they got dominated in the trenches and they got outcoached fundamentally because there were things that they couldn't do. I think that's the part that I think is gone. And but they got to show that it's gone. I mean, Harry Hiestand, it's gone. As soon as he stepped in the room, it was gone because of his proven track record. If Coach Stuckey can get this group playing fundamentally sound football, I do think the talent is there for them to be at least a pretty good wide receiving core. I'm not ready to go full on where you are right now because I still need to see more from Lorenzo.
Sure.
But I it's got a chance to be pretty good, especially when you factor in Michael Mayer. I think the last part for me, Ryan, that you look at the areas got to improve is we talked a lot about the offensive line yesterday and the running backs. And I fully anticipate the pass protection to be outstanding this season. And I think the running game is going to be a lot better. There's one final question mark about the running game, though, that we do need to address, and that is, can the running game be dominant in the big games? And that's a question mark. And honestly, it's partly a question mark because of you need to see it, but also there were times with Coach Hiestand, and this is true for everybody, where in some of those big games, they weren't able to really establish running game. I think of the Georgia game in 2017. I think of Miami later in the year. Now, there were things that were done schematically and mistakes were made in the backfield and all those other type of things, but they weren't able to kind of go out there and just establish their will in some games. Yep. They're going to have to do that this year. And so that's my question is, the running game at some point in time this season is going to click and it's going to be, wow, that's really good. The question for me, however, is how soon will that happen? Because that could determine whether or not you go into October 3-1 or 4-0. And we all know what I'm talking about. If the running game needs time to get going, Notre Dame probably loses the opener. If they can set the agenda in the opener with, hey, we're here and we're dominant and we don't need no grace period. We're ready to roll, then I think they have a shot to go win that first game, especially if the other things we discussed get answered, because that's the thing is, so I still have question marks, not so much about the run game. I think at the end of the year, the numbers are going to look great. I think in October, November, the run game is going to be excellent. I have two questions about it. How quickly can they get going, and can they get going against the elite defenses? That's not a question mark for me in the opener. Despite CBS Sports ranking Ohio State's defense 5th in the nation coming into the 2022 season, Ryan, we haven't talked about that yet. You and I will talk about that at the show, which is patently absurd. It's just not that, but it's a big game. Can you be there in the big game? But more so when you play Clemson in November. Can you go out against that offensive line and say, we're going to give you room to run? Now it's up to you to go do something with it. Those are the two question marks I have. How quickly, and can they really be at their best in those big moments? Because there's a chance you're going to play Georgia in the postseason. Guess what? I don't care who they lost in the NFL. Like a buddy of mine was like, I don't know if Georgia's going to have a great defense. They lost this guy, this guy, this guy. So, yeah, but their best player's coming back. And they've got this guy, Nolan Smith. They've got this other guy that's stepping into the mix that they're going to be fine. And so they're going to still be there. Bama's going to have a better front seven this year than they had last year. And they were pretty good last year. So to win a championship, you're going to have to beat several teams with great front sevens, which means this offensive line is going to have to be able to establish itself in the run game in those games. Having a mobile quarterback helps, but I'm not talking about Tyler Buckner pulling and keeping it on an outside run. I'm not talking about jet sweeps. I'm talking about, can you line up and say, we're going to run our inside zone, our counter, our outside zone, our duo. We're going to run our stuff, and we're going to be able to do it effectively and force you to have to reduce your box, because then we're going to be able to go out and make plays on the perimeter. That, to me, is still a bit of a question mark for this unit.
The things that gives me hope with the units, and I agree, it's 100% a question mark because it's just something we haven't seen consistently at all at a high level over the last couple of years. The things that gives me hope is, one, Harry Hiestand's coaching, right? That's an easy one. The offensive line should be a much more aggressive unit. They should be much more physical. They should be much more downhill. So I think that they're going to be able to establish and move the line of scrimmage in their favor more often than not. That gives me hope to start with. Number two is I like the running back room. We've talked about it, right? I think you mix and match this talent level, and you'll have a lot of different abilities to run inside zone, outside zone, pin and pull, gap schemes. Like I think that you can do almost anything with this trio of runners or more that you could potentially have, depending on when Logan Diggs gets back to in the folds. And then the last thing, Brian, and we've talked about this a ton, is having the threat of Tyler Buckner is going to make some easier boxes. It's just going to. That slot defender, that overhang, whatever you want to call him, that guy has to get eyes on Tyler Buckner, or else he's just going to pull it. And that's just the end of the game, right? That's the numbers game at the end of the day. Those things all combined tells me that Notre Dame's running game is going to be better than last year, I believe. Now, we haven't seen it, so it's still a question mark. There's no doubt. My biggest question with this team, and I think that it's going to be better, because I think that there's obviously a new onus on Tommy Rees having more freedom, and there's a new head coach involved. But there have been points, and you mentioned this already, in the past where there was a very passive approach to running the football, and there was not an assertive approach. I think back to, was that the Georgia game a couple of years ago? And I know the running game at that point, like I think Tony Jones Jr. was their best runner, their leading rusher
in
that
19.
year. I think it was 19.
Yeah.
Remember after the game, I think Brian Kelly said something like, "We knew we weren't going to be able to run the ball."
Right.
And I'm just like, you don't say that,
because they only had
sir.
one healthy running back.
Yeah.
Was part of it too. Like, but
And
still.
I get
carried the ball
that.
9 times.
Right.
9 times.
And my biggest quarrel with that, Brian, is like, yeah, you probably weren't going to run the ball, but you don't say that out loud, man.
And
like
part of it was too, he didn't want to play Kyron Williams. He didn't want to play Kyron Williams in the game.
Yeah.
So
it's just
you don't say that. Because
it's a defeat.
But it was the mentality,
approach.
Ryan. It was the mentality. The mentality wasn't there. Yeah. And when your head coach says those things, that's the mentality you're going to have. And this is going to be a different group. It's going to be a different group. But it's, again, a lot of this comes down to, Ryan, it's show me time. Right? And 100%. We're excited for the season, and we're talking a lot of good things, and we think they can do this, and we think they can do that. And I think they can be I do genuinely believe this team can be a playoff team. And if some things go there in their way and go in their favor, I think this team can compete for a title. The margin for error is way thinner. They have to catch some breaks during the season, if I'm being completely honest with you, meaning maybe some better health than you anticipate. Maybe some guys step up that you weren't necessarily trying to step up. You catch a break in regard to somebody, like Georgia caught a break to win a title. If Jameson Williams doesn't get hurt, they don't win a title, in my opinion. They caught a break. Hey, no one's taking that ring from them, right? It's like that scene at the end of Talladega Nights. He's like, you try to take this from me, I'm gonna sock you right in your face. You know what I mean? Like, this is still our trophy. It's don't blame us because your dudes got hurt and you didn't have guys ready to go. But that's still catching a break. I don't dismiss it. That's part of sports. I mean, that's part of sports. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just, for me, it's like, it's all good. It sounds great. And I just gotta see it. Right, at some of these positions, like receiver, I got to see it. Can Tyler Buckner be that dude? Is there a lot of excitement in the program about him? Absolutely, but I got to see it. Can the run game go out and dominate Ohio State? Yeah, it's capable of it. I got to see it. Can they be better against Clemson in November in the run game than they were against Georgia in 2017? Yeah, but I got to see it, right. And that's kind of where we're at. And they got to stay healthy. I think those two things are where it's going to determine whether this is a 10-2 team that's, hey, good first season for Marcus Freeman. Or is it like, okay, Marcus Freeman's already starting. It's like, if they go 10-2, it's like, okay, you feel good about the future because he maintained what Kelly did, but the recruiting is better. So now you're excited about the future.
And you didn't stunt that momentum on the recruiting trail if you're 10-2. You can still paint that as like, hey, this is my first year. We're heading in the right direction. 100%.
Or does he say, we're already past where we were? Sure. And that's going to be determined a lot by here. Because the question marks on defense aren't, to me, as great. I have a lot more confidence in that the defense is going to be pretty good this year. I don't think the secondary stinks. I think Notre Dame fans have really convinced themselves that this secondary is worse than it actually is. It's not as bad as you all make it out to be, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I understand why recency bias is a real thing. We all experience it. I understand it. You have the visions of, Clarence Lewis just constantly getting beat on one-on-ones against Oklahoma State. That's not who Clarence Lewis has been his whole career. He's had some moments like that. But he's not going to be that bad. And if he is, somebody's going to beat him out. You know, the front seven should be really good. They have an All-American, they have two of the best defensive backs in the country in the secondary. Like the bar's been raised. And so to me, I look at it and say, that side of the ball, I have supreme confidence in because we've seen it.
Yes.
Offensively, we just haven't seen it. Not with any consistency. There were times when Chip Long had this offense rolling, and then there were times those offenses just couldn't move the ball against good teams. There were times last year that Tommy Rees had this offense rolling, even in a game. First half against Oklahoma State, if that's the offense we see most of this year, Notre Dame's going to win a lot of games. Second half, if we see that offense much this year, they're going to lose some games or win some ugly ones against teams that they can out-talent. It's about putting it all together. And like I said, we just got to see it. That's going to be that's going to be it.
There's a combination you get excited for, but until you put it all together, it's not a real thing yet. So I agree with you.
And I want to say this too. Brian J. Irish says, I'll still take an unknown Chancey Stuckey than a known Dell Alexander. No question. But that's not really what we're saying. What we're saying is they're going to be, we've said this before, they're going to be better on the offensive line this year. They're going to be better at wide receiver this year. The question that we're talking about is how much better, because the standard isn't be better than Dell. That's not the standard. That's just like if you walk in and you just try, you're going to be better than Dell. The standard is, can you get that group to play to the level it needs to play to go out and compete for a championship? That's the question mark for Coach Stuckey. That's a much higher bar, like a much higher bar. It's like I have full confidence that the day Chancey Stuckey showed up at Notre Dame, he was better than Dell Alexander. Full confidence in that. That's not very hard though. And the question is can Coach Stuckey be kind of in a short period of time become the type of teacher and mentor and coach that's needed to take a group that's lacked confidence? Because there was one theme that was permeating through the entire intel yesterday of the receivers. Tobias shows up with a certain level of attitude. The one question mark that I heard about a lot of the different receivers, Braden Lindsey, Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, was consistency and confidence. And they didn't always have it. And they're starting to figure it out. That, to me, is the greatest thing that Chancey Stuckey can give them besides just the basics that, honestly, a GA could teach them. To me, for Coach Stuckey to get to that level, it's not, oh, wow, did you see the phenomenal press release moves that he's built in? That's not that hard to teach if you care, right? It's more of the mentality, the mindset. When Kevin Austin got hit in the mouth last year, I'm not going to say this disrespectfully, so let me think of how the right would say it. His game took a big hit. How about that? Is that a nice way of saying it? He was largely ineffective in those moments where he got hit in the mouth. And it's not because Kevin Austin didn't have courage or didn't want it, or he wasn't given the tools technically and mentally to handle those situations that come from coaching. That's why coaches get paid lots and lots of money. Great. I think that's the question for Chancey Stuckey. Can he give them the mental and technical tools that when they get hit in the mouth, they're like, okay, I got something for you next time I come back out here.
And great coaches aren't just great teachers. They're great challengers, right? Like they're challenging them to be the best version of themselves. That's why in the intel piece you put out, it's like a couple of kids. It's like, we want them to be more consistent. Well, I guarantee it's not like a super as inconsistent as people might read that as, right? It's just that Chancey Stuckey wants them to be the best version of themselves, and they're not there yet, right? Mm-hmm. Like they need, in order for this team to be great, I agree with you, Brian. And that's why I brought up that little comment by Brian Kelly in the past, because that's not expecting your team to be great, man. That is just settling. That is being passive. These coaches need to demand excellence out of these players because the talent is there. It's always been there, for being honest. Has it been short in a spot here and there? Of course. In a group here and there? Of course. But it's not because of a lack of talent. I believe it's because there were some coaches on the staff in the past that did not demand their players to be the absolute best that they possibly could be. I think that Chancey Stuckey is going to demand that out of these players. I know Harry Hiestand is going to demand those out of the players. And everything I've heard from Marcus Freeman, just in general, tells me that he's also going to demand that while also appealing to a younger crowd. So I'm excited. But to the point of this entire show, these are all things that get us super excited. The possibilities, the upside, that all gets you super excited. But until you see it, it's not real. That's the end all be all to it.
Right. That's going to do it for this portion of the show. We're going to have a mailbag. We already have 19 different questions starred. We have a lot of super chats, so we're going to get to those in the mailbag portion, but that's going to do it for this one, Ryan. And again, the answers to these questions are going to go a very long way towards determining if this is another 10-2 type of season, because again, the schedule is stronger. When Notre Dame has played multiple ranked opponents in most recent years, they have been a 2-loss team in these most of these seasons. Now they're going to prove that they can at least minimum continue that or take the next step. That'll be determined by the answers to these questions. Before we move on to the mailbag, please hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. But don't go sign up for the board yet, because unless you're listening later, then you can hit pause. Then go to boards.irishbreakdown.com and sign up for that. Reminder, if for some of you that may take off now, don't go. But if you are, 6 o'clock tonight is the IB Nation Sports Talk Show with Sean Stiers. And then 7:30, we're going live again to cover the pending decision of Jaden Ausberry, the linebacker from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who will decide between Notre Dame. It's Notre Dame, LSU, Texas A&M, Michigan, Auburn, and Alabama are the schools he will choose from. So you're going to want to check that out tonight as well. So, Ryan, let's get to our mailbag. We have some great questions here. We have a lot of super chats, which we really appreciate. Chris Wheeler with a super chat just for the excellent offense and defense intel pieces hot off the press. Awesome work, guys. Chris, buddy, thank you very, very much for that, because that means he's giving us a super chat on top of paying for the membership, which we greatly appreciate you, Chris. My guy, Riza, big shout out to you guys. Side note, Ryan was a great hire and provides awesome content. Keep it going. You are correct about that. Actually, Vince was telling me that. He probably won't want me to tell you this. Vince was telling me that the other night, and my response was, just don't tell him that. I don't want his head getting too big. But seriously, Ryan has been a tremendous hire. A lot of the things that we're doing, that the growth we've had, is because him putting out great content and doing his work has freed me up to do some other things, and I hope to add even more to our staff. If my next hire is anywhere close to as good as Ryan was, we're going to really get this thing rocking and rolling. But I know how uneasy he is with that kind of praise. It's like, okay, what do I do? What do I say here?
I don't like compliments, man. But I appreciate Brian. I truly do appreciate you, and I appreciate this super chat. This is again fulfilling a lifelong dream. So thank you all. I really do appreciate it.
And we didn't match today. We have different shirts on.
Oh yeah, we do.
Yeah, I got the blue IB Nation. You just have an IB shirt, right?
Yep, just the IB.
So,
yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Tony Shea with a super chat. Just a quick thank you for being cool with my DMs, Brian. You are very, very welcome. I try my best to answer everybody's DMs as much as I can, but I want to thank you for that. Got a few more super chats. Connor Patton super chat. If you were Ohio State's defensive coordinator, what would your game plan be for Notre Dame? You really think I'm going to give Jim Knowles that? No, I'm kidding. He knows. Ryan, first thing is you've got to find ways to create disruption at the point of attack. Mm-hmm. That's going to be the biggest thing. If you think you can do it with your defensive line, great. If you think that there's a matchup up front, like, hey, we really think if we get, Teron Vincent against Zeke Correll, and if there's ways that we can get him one-on-one, so we'll put him in the shade and we'll crash the linebacker into the B gap, which forces that other guard to kind of help there. And we think Teron can win one-on-ones in the run game against, the center, then, you do that, or against a guard or against a tackle or whatever. If you think you can get a numbers advantage up front, hey, they don't handle this movement well. Right. Mm-hmm. So teams that really slant the end hard inside and loop the tackle out gives them problems. Or it could be the other way around. Teams that really slant the nose or the 3 technique out really hard, or 1 technique out really hard, and then loop the nose or blitz a linebacker that's not directly behind that stunter. Well, they have a hard time seeing that and picking that up. So it's finding those deficiencies. And I don't know I'm making those up. Those are things they struggled with in the past. I don't know if those are going to be the same now because it's a different line coach. But
Sure.
It'll be stuff like that. It's, hey, we've identified this run concept, but they leave this edge short, so we're going to attack it this way, things like that. But at the end of the day, it's create, it's twofold with that. You've got to win at the point of attack that prevents Notre Dame from getting to, like, what's the goal of the line? We want to reset the line of scrimmage in our favor, meaning if the line of scrimmage is here and we're on this side as an offense, we want to reset it with the line here. And then the backs can kind of get on their tracks, and it forces quicker decisions by the defense, and that opens up run game opportunities. If you're Ohio State, you want to prevent that. The second part is you want to make Tyler Buckner think. You want to make him think as much as possible. You want him thinking like, you're showing me this, but you're dropping this. And, and we've heard reports about a 3-3-5 or whatever the case may be. All I know is Jim Knowles did a lot of stuff last year at Ohio State where he would show certain looks and then bring different things. They would do like they could get in like a bear front out of a 3-man look at times with the way that they brought their linebackers and walked up different guys. He's going to show this coverage and bring you something different. He's got to find ways where he can, number one, confuse Tyler Buckner without then confusing his own secondary. Because the cool thing is if you're the defensive coordinator, you may call something that makes the quarterback make a mistake, but there's also a chance that your guy can make a mistake. And if Tyler Buckner sees it, it's, strike up the Notre Dame band.
Yep.
So I think those are the things. Confuse the quarterback, win at the line of scrimmage. How he's going to go about doing that, I'm not going to get into that kind of stuff, but I think just kind of big picture, that would be what my game plan would be built around, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, based upon what we saw last year, I would be disguising a lot of coverage and having a lot of post-snap movements from a rotation perspective. And I mean, to your point, Brian, if I'm watching that offensive line from last year, and again, that's not the same. It's not in theory going to be the same offensive line as it was last year. So this is the tough part about having the first game of the year. Sometimes is you're preparing for what you already have seen, but that isn't necessarily the team that you're going to get per se. But I think that I would play a decent amount of man coverage, and I think I would bring a lot of pressure, right? Like that's what I think I would do. Second level pressure, and I also would move the defensive line a lot. I know you mentioned that, like slant a little bit, maybe some twists, like put out a bunch of different looks up front. I want to try to confuse this team, and I want to be aggressive because last year the offensive line was not aggressive, right? So you can kind of dictate the pace and the aggressiveness up front with movements and with pressure, and that's kind of just a couple of the easy things I would do I would dictate the pace up front, first and second level. And then I'm going to play a lot of man, but I might design things a little bit. Maybe I'm showing too high at the snap and then I rotate down to a single high, cover one look, like that type of thing. So,
or show a 3 cloud, but it's actually 2. And you roll that boundary corner down or the field corner down, whoever you're disguising to try to show that the cover 3 look. There's different things like that.
100%.
Fashawn Alabama Flip with a super chat. Bry and Rye regarding recruiting has slipped to number 4, Bama to number 1, Jordan number 3, while we remain at number 2. Any intel on what's going on at OSU? Sorry if you've talked about that already. So is he saying Ohio State's fallen to number 4?
I think they fell to number 4. I think he said it in his follow-up after that. That he meant to write that Ohio State fell.
Okay, let me find that follow-up because I want to put that in proper context. It does highlight it up here, so I will find that. Here we go. Okay, so my super chat was supposed to say Ohio State has slipped 4. Okay.
Yep.
I mean, honestly, this is just part of the business. Honestly, for Sean, it's just part of the business, right? It's cyclical. This is why you can't ride those waves. I think, for example, Alabama and Georgia have both ridden a wave into the top 4. I think Alabama's more poised to stay there than Georgia is, in my opinion, when you just look at who they're on the board for, who's left, and those type of things. Like Georgia strikes me as a little bit in a little bit of the old Notre Dame way, not as far of a fall, but they've kind of tapped out just how good this class can be without some flips. I think what's happened at Ohio State is they're just kind of coming back to earth a little bit, right? It's just the other teams are catching them. There's some guys they'll end up getting on, and there'll be some guys they'll flip, they'll stay, they'll have a chance to get back up there. I think Georgia, and also Notre Dame's only number 2 on the composite. They're actually here's why I have a hard time with, again, I constantly pick the flaws in the recruiting business. Notre Dame is ranked number 1 by Rivals, on 247's own ranking, and on ESPN. The only outlet that doesn't have Notre Dame number 1 that's factored in the ranking is on 3. Yet Notre Dame's not number 1 in the composite, which I just don't understand.
Even though you're number 1 at 3 out of the 4.
3 out of the 4. right?
Yeah,
But it is Notre
yeah,
Dame and Alabama. But, look, Ohio State's going to end up flipping somebody. They're going to get in on a kid that right now that they're not in on, that they're going to then be able to land, who's going to be a highly ranked player. They're going to end up being fine.
yep.
I do think these are going to be 3 of the 4. I actually think when it's all said and done, Georgia's going to get leaped by Texas. I do.
Very
I do,
possible.
especially if Georgia's not quite as good as they were last year, because I have a lot of theories on that. But honestly, with Ohio State, I think a lot of this is, and I know some people are going to disagree with me on this, is Ohio State is doing things for players. The card game at Ohio State's always been strong, but Ohio State's not just handing out these $1 million NIL deals. And I think when Cardinal Tate committed, there was this assumption that Ohio State matched what Tennessee offered him. That's not true. Did they have an NIL package for him? Yes, but it wasn't like the others, which is why he's still looking around. And this is what Sean Davis said back in March. He's like, look, wherever Cardinal commits to first, it ain't over. Right. And Brandon Ennis has said in the past that NIL is going to be a very important decision here. And so they're going to listen to those things. But at the end of the day, as long as you still keep them in the class, they're fine. Like losing Ty Lockwood, that doesn't bother me. Yes, it hurts him in the rankings. But
they just got Jelani Thurman.
And I think he's better. And I think Thurman better fits how they use the tight end. Work the seams, be kind of a guy that doesn't catch a lot of balls, but can work the middle of the field. Thurman's actually a guy that's got a little bit of a uniqueness to him where you can actually kind of line him outside in some red zone stuff because he's super long. Right? He's not like super explosive, but he's got good body control and he's really long. Like he looks like a
catch.
Oh
he's
my
a catch radius basketball player. Like that's what he is. Yeah.
He's just not, like I said, not real. Like he doesn't have the explosiveness like Eli Raridan, but he brings some of that length to the table that Eli brings to the table. So they lost him. They lost Dejon Johnson. They're going to get somebody else in the secondary, right? Because they lost dudes last year. Remember, they lost the kid, the Terrence Brooks, right? He flipped somewhere else, and another DB flipped somewhere else late in the process. This is when you get into the NIL game. This is what happens. I mean, you're just going to lose some guys. It's the reality of it. Then you got to go replace them with somebody else. So I think they'll be fine. But some of those guys are going to. They're looking around, but they're not necessarily. And some of this is posturing. Hey, I want to stay with Ohio State, but I need to get my package bigger, so I'm going to flirt with this other school to see what they counter with. And that's some of that. It's going to be some of that too. But I think they're fine. For me, rankings wise, they still got to improve their offensive line class. I think their offensive line class is very overrated. I think the Luke Montgomery is extremely overrated as an offensive lineman. Like people got him in like the 50s and 60s. I don't see that. Josh Padilla is a nice player, but he's a little undersized. And I think Austin Saraveld's a nice player, but he's not what a top 150 player like some people have him. That's the question mark for me, for them, is can they go out and get an offensive tackle? Like they were in really good shape early for Samson Okunlola. Now he's kind of looking at some of the Southern schools. They got to rebound on that one. Like that's a guy that's out there for them still, that if they can kind of get back on top for him, all of a sudden you just added a top 30 player and a guy that fills a hole. For me, that honestly, Fashawn, is where I care about with Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, Notre Dame, Texas. I don't care about the recruiting rankings. Did you add impact players and did you meet all your needs? And that's why I love this Notre Dame class. Outside of quarterback, they've met all their needs already. Now it's just adding a little something on to it, right? That's what I like about their class. And that's where I think Ohio State is. And I had this debate with a guy that I respect the other day. I said, yes, Alabama has more high-level players, but that doesn't mean their class is better. They just have more points because they have 5 stars, and 5 stars get, a little bit too much love than I think they should. Same thing with Ohio State. And this is why I've always said, Ohio State's rankings are right there with their names, but if there's more holes in that class than, in my opinion, than what you have in Notre Dame. And as Ohio State can fill those holes, that's what matters. Whether they finish second, third, fourth, or fifth, it's about adding impact players. They have some of those. And there's some guys I think at Ohio State that I think are a little underranked too. I don't know how Jason Moore's not a consensus top 50 player. I think that's nuts.
Weird.
Like he's a consensus top 50 player. And there's a couple of, like the other Rogers kid, not Noah Rogers, but the Bryson Rogers. He's underranked in my opinion. That guy's so yes, I would take Cardinal Tate down the rankings a little bit, but I'd also raise Bryson Rogers, and it balances itself out. So I think that's going to be the key. They need to get back some secondary talent, which they lost from some flips last year and this year. Got to improve that, and they got to fill their offensive line out. After that, the defensive line is the only other hole really that I think that they have, a glaring hole that they have, outside of maybe adding another linebacker. Because after the 4 they signed last year, linebacker numbers aren't a need. Either they have Arvell Reese or they will get him. Has he committed to Ohio State yet, Arvell Reese?
I'm not sure about that.
If he hasn't, he will, right? But they lost Taggart Curtis and guys like that, so they'll be all right. But I think Notre Dame is obviously in a better position at that point in time.
It's so weird to be able to talk about actual flips that happened instead of potential flips that everyone is creating.
Like we didn't talk about some of the other guys that people are saying are going to flip because they haven't flipped yet for Ohio State. So until they do, I'm not going to spend too much time on it.
Exactly.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
Amazing.
AST 12321 with a super chat. Outrageous value from Irish Breakdown. The intel on the board was exciting to read. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was exciting to put together. Like there was a couple times I'd be like, hold on a second. Can you repeat that for me, please? Like, did you seriously just tell me that? Yes, I did. Okay, cool. Mark it down. So I was very happy to hear some of that intel. And then you hear it from person, like the Tobias Merriweather intel, for example, really glowing. That's not from one person. I've heard that from like 3 to 4 different people, and not once did I ask anyone about it. Like I just say, hey, how's summer going? Oh man, this dude Tobias Merriweather. And I'm like, oh, okay. Get text message like, hey, Tobias Merriweather's killing it. Oh, okay, thank you. Like, thanks for letting me know. So yeah, it's some really good stuff on there. So thank you for that. Sean S. with a super chat. Do you expect Tyler Buckner in 2022 to be a better player than Kaiser was? Trying to gauge expectations from what you're hearing. So I think we're kind of looking at what Kaiser was in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this. I think Deshaun was a little bit more advanced from an arm strength standpoint, and he was bigger.
He was a lot bigger. Yep.
I think Tyler is a more accurate passer for the most part. I think Tyler has shown, even in limited time last year, but especially in high school, to be the superior guy from an anticipation standpoint. And I think Tyler is more explosive athletically, although Deshaun could bring you some really good stuff in the run game because of his size. And he was a good athlete, but his size. I would say, I graded out Tyler higher coming out of high school than Deshaun. I think Deshaun had a great arm, but Deshaun wasn't always the greatest when it came to ball placement. The biggest question mark for me, the one area that Deshaun right now is significantly better than where Tyler was, Deshaun Kaiser threw a gorgeous deep ball. 100%. Now, it helped that he had Will Fuller, and he could just literally throw it as far as he wanted to, and then Will would run underneath it. But Deshaun's deep ball and his back shoulder throws, were money. Like, even in games, he was terrible against Temple. Terrible. But when the game was on the line, he hit 2 downfield shots. He had a corner route to Alizé Mack to set up the back shoulder fade to Will Fuller for the touchdown. And then we saw, the bomb he threw against Virginia for the win. He threw a bomb to Will Fuller for a touchdown. The post route where he beat, where Will Fuller beat. I'm drawing a blank here on the cornerback they had that was so good.
Adoree Jackson.
Yeah. Like, Deshaun threw a great deep ball. And that really opened that offense up because, like, you couldn't load the box because between Will Fuller, Chris Brown, Amir Carlisle, Alizé Mack, CJ Process out of the backfield, like, if you tried to come up too tight to the line, you just were going to flat get run by. Mm-hmm. And, and that played right into Deshaun's hands because he threw a great deep ball. But in almost every other area besides size, I think Tyler's the better player. I really do.
Man, that post route against Adoree Jackson, like, I knew that Will Fuller was fast before that, but at that point I was like, oh, he's fast. Like, because Adoree could run, man. Right. He put him in the dust.
Right.
Like, whoa. Okay,
and you're watching Adoree like trying so hard to catch Will Fuller, and Will's just like pulling away from him. You're like, wow.
No grounds. Like, oh man.
You're like, yeah. That was and Adoree ran a 4.42 at the combine.
Yeah, Adoree can run, man.
Yeah,
he can really run.
Will ran a 4.32. That's a whole different type of speed right there, buddy. Different type of speed. We've got a super chat from Brandon. Thank you for that very, very much, Brandon. Brandon asks, how many returning starters would you say Notre Dame has this season? I think you could make a case for 16 to 17, 8 on offense and 8 on defense, in my opinion. Well, I think at receiver you can make a case for 2. Because I think Braden was a starter last year, and then Avery was a starter. Offensive line-wise, I think Joe Alt, Jarrett Patterson have to be considered starters. Josh Lugg was considered a starter. And then I think I'd put Kristofic and Carell into one at that point in time because one started and the other replaced him. So to me, you have, I would argue, 4 returning starters in the offensive line, right? Lugg, Alt, Patterson, and then Kristofic / Carell. Do you agree with that, Ryan?
Yeah.
So that's 4, 2 receivers, and then
That's
Michael
6.
Mayer. That's 7.
Oh, 7. Yep.
I don't count any of the running backs as a returning starter. I don't count any of the other receivers as returning starters. Like Lorenzo started for the bowl game, but for me, a starter is someone who started over a period of time, not a guy that started a game. Like I don't count Marvin Harrison Jr. as a returning starter, even though he started the bowl game. That doesn't count to me. So I'd go 7. Now, you also because I could, Tosh Baker started 2 games last year. Michael Carmody started 2 games last year. Those guys to me aren't returning starters per se. The only asterisk that I would accept as a counter argument would be Blake Fisher, because Blake Fisher started the only 2 games he was healthy for. He would have started the whole year, but again, that's 2 games. So I just have a hard time accepting that. But if you wanted to say I'm going to count him as a returning starter, I'd be okay with that. I wouldn't argue that.
That's fair.
Defensively, it's 2. It's Isaiah Foskey up front, defensive line wise. It's Isaiah Foskey and Jason Amiel up front. At linebacker, it's 2. It's J.D. Bertrand and Jack Kaiser. And the secondary, I would say it's 3. It's Clarence Lewis. All the safeties kind of combined into one starter opposite Kyle Hamilton. And then Cam Hart. You could argue, however, well, he's a nickel. I'll handle Tariq in a second. Yeah. I think you could make a case that you have 2 returning starters at safety, because you can make the case one of 2 ways. Once Kyle went down, the 2 guys that started are both back. Sure. Plus DJ started at times, but you have Houston and Ramon are both back. So you could argue you have those 2 back. Or if you wanted to make a case, I know that Brandon Joseph didn't start at Notre Dame, but he is a 2-year starter in the Big Ten. Either way, I think you got to go 2 and 7. Really, honestly, your entire secondary comes back as returning starters. If you start in the nickel, you still have that guy back. The reason I don't count Tariq on top of it is because if you go nickel, Ryan, he replaces Jack Kaiser.
That's fair. So you're cycling out. That makes sense.
Yeah. So that's why I would go there. So you have 2 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and your entire secondary. So you have 8. So, I think you could make the case for 8, but just for me, I'd go 15 just because I don't count Blake Fisher because he just played so little.
That's it. But to Brandon's question, if you did want to count Blake, then you could say 16, where he's at.
I 17. I don't think I could get to unless you're going to start talking about guys that started multiple games. But to me, when I do a returning starter, I'm not counting 3 guys at 2 positions as all 3 being returning starters, because you can't start. Because otherwise, you could look at Notre Dame and be like, defensively, you could say they have 13 returning starters, because Justin Adamiola was a starter in the nickel. Bo Bauer was a starter in the nickel. Tariq Bracy was a starter in the nickel. Tariq Bracy started several games. The Wisconsin game, it was Clarence Lewis and Tariq Bracy in the starting lineup, not Cam Hart.
Right.
But I'm just trying to be more practical in a way that makes it actually look relevant to how much experience you have. But the point is, Brandon, to build on to your point, you could go 8 on offense, 8 on defense, but then there's guys that have played a ton. Chris Tyree started the bowl game. Lorenzo Styles started the bowl game. Michael Carmody started 2 games last year. Tosh Baker started 2 games last year. If you want to get technical, you have Andrew Kristofic and Zeke Curl are 2 different people that both started at least 5 games last year. And then defensively, Justin Adamiola, as we'll talk about the nickel, Bo Bauer in the nickel, Tariq Bracy has started a ton of games in his career. You have over 10 guys on both sides of the ball that have started at least 2 football games in their career. That's a lot of experience coming back. And that's what makes the mentions in the intel pieces about the young guys stand out even more, is because they're not doing this from the standpoint of holes that need to be filled. They're standing out because, wow, that guy's really good. And that's really where you want to be at this point in time, right?
Yep.
A lot of great questions today. We have one here from Archer 452, resident Ohio State fan. If the Buckeye defense shows up against the Notre Dame offense, which is more likely, the OSU defense is good or the Notre Dame offense isn't so good, my money is on the former, as I expect the Notre Dame offense to be good. Well, I think that number one, I would somewhat push back on the premise of the question, Ryan. Just because
Yeah.
you don't play well in a game doesn't mean you aren't good.
Sure.
And so the Ohio State offense played like garbage against Northwestern in the Big Ten title game. Does that mean they weren't good, or does that mean they just had a bad game?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what I would say is if the Ohio State defense outplays the Notre Dame offense, it's going to make me concerned about the Notre Dame offense. I don't think Ohio State is good enough talent-wise to come out and beat Notre Dame if Notre Dame is good, unless it's just an off game or some guys aren't as good as we think they are. So I would lean more towards it being a concern for the Notre Dame offense than the other. Against Clemson, a little different deal, right?
Sure.
If Notre Dame could play well and still not score a bunch of points against Clemson because it's a really good defense. I just don't have that same level of faith in the Ohio State defense, Ryan.
These questions are always tough for me, Brian, honestly, because it's like I think it's if that happens, I think it's a little bit of a combination, right? I think that you could say Notre Dame first game, first year starting quarterback, transition stuff from the coaching perspective. Like there's reasons that Notre Dame may not be clicking on all cylinders in game one outside of it just being game one. But also, if Buckeyes defense just comes out and kind of stifles, let's say Notre Dame's offense to a degree, then I would say that it's probably because Jim Knowles unlocked a little bit of that defensive potential, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's a combination. I tend to agree with you, though, a little bit there because I have trouble thinking that Jim Knowles is going to turn it around that quickly in game one, right? So I imagine it's more towards the shortcomings, per se, of a Notre Dame offense than an Ohio State defense. But I think for me, Archer, it's never usually one way or the other, for being honest. Like I think it's a little bit of both. It's kind of like the push to shove type of conversation, but I think it's going to be a little bit of both things if that ends up happening.
Well, and Ryan, that's kind of why I've said in the past, like how I view Ohio State in the opener on defense is not how I view Ohio State on, in November on defense, because we're talking about this specific matchup of this Notre Dame team against Ohio State. And so to me, that's kind of the way I look at it. It is a little bit of a different animal, in my opinion. It's not the same thing for me. So I would be in game one, I'd be more concerned about Notre Dame. Sean Kane said, can they stay healthy is the most important question for the Notre Dame offense, especially at running back, where they have had a few injuries already, and wide receiver where depth is limited. Agree with both of those things.
That's why we started this podcast with that, Shane, a little bit, right? We talked about the health of the offense because there are a couple positions where we're a little more worried about the depth in pertinence to the defensive side of the football, right? Like that's where the kind of the questions, it's not a talent level question, it's a depth issue, right? That's why the injuries matter that much more. So I agree completely with you. That's why we kind of made that the over encompassing beginning of this podcast.
Yep. Next question from ND Mac, caught yesterday's show this morning. Do you think the lack of SEC Big Ten quarterback success has to do with the elite guys around them covering up deficiencies compared to, say, Rodgers and Allen in college? Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And also, too, is sometimes when you have the talent that like Bama and Georgia have had, Nick Saban for a long time wanted to go with the guy that was just not going to make mistakes. And Kirby's still trying to do that. Like Kirby's still trying to be what Bama was in 2010 to 2014. That's what Kirby's trying to do. He's trying to replicate that version of Alabama. Nick Saban has kind of moved on beyond that. Not that he's okay with mistakes, but look, the more you throw it, the more risk there is. I mean, there's a big difference between Tua, Mac Jones, and Bryce Young, and Greg McElroy, AJ McCarron, and Blake Sims, and Jacob Coker. It's like a completely different universe because it's a different style of play. So, yes, I think that you're right. I also think there's some other reasons for it that I'm not sure if I'm comfortable talking about publicly. But I think that's part of it. I just think also quarterbacks tend to be produced in certain states more from more of a volume standpoint. And there's like a lot of great quarterbacks that have come out of the state of California. I mean, I know Tom Brady played in the Big Ten, but he's a California guy. I mean, we've talked about all the California Alabama starting quarterback. He's not from Alabama. He's from California. And so we've seen a lot of that as well. And so I don't know how to explain. I don't. Like, why did Pennsylvania used to recruit great quarterbacks? Is it high school coaching? Is it just DNA? Is it I don't know. I don't know what it is. I mean, you think about some of the legends that came out of the state of Pennsylvania for a long time. Joe Montana, Dan Marino, Joe Namath. I mean, I could go on for a long time talking about that. California, same way.
Western PA guys, man.
Right.
Western PA guys. Yep.
But California, same way. I mean, it's not just recently. I mean, do you remember that John Elway dude? Right. I mean, Tom Brady.
Never heard of John Elway before.
It's crazy. I'm. You know what? I want to know something. I wonder. Let me look up something here real quick. I want to see something here. Just give me a second. No, not quite. Well, yeah, actually, Tom Brady's closer in age to John Elway than he is to Bryce Young.
That's silly, man.
But again, it's different generations is my point. And you're still seeing that stuff come out of California now. So, and that's part of it as well. And obviously the Big Ten hasn't gone and gotten a lot of those guys from California. Some of the ones they have, who's the best quarterback in the Big Ten right now?
Oh, it's CJ Stroud.
Where's CJ Stroud from?
California.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Justin Kate says, Brian, I could really use you geeking out over the commitment of your favorite player tonight. Full fanboy, I think is what he meant to say. We'll see. We'll see who he decides tonight. So I'm going to reserve any emotions I have one way or the other until he makes his announcement. So, but yeah, you'll definitely want to tune in tonight.
And just another plug for it, because there was a question in the chat a little bit ago. It is at 7:30 Eastern time that we will be live tonight to see what Jaden Osbury's decision is, just in case anybody was wondering out there.
Thank you for clearing that up. Felix Fournier, how many healthy wide receivers do we need? The numbers of potential dudes we have at tight end kind of makes me feel safe regarding the depth of receiver. I want to address this, Ryan, because there's two different answers to this. And one is often overlooked by non-coaches. And I don't mean that disrespectfully at all. It's just that's not something you have to think about. But as a coach, if we're just talking about game planning, I need 5 and I'm good. And the reason I say 5 is because between how much I can take some of the pressure off of with my tight ends and my 21 personnel, I don't need to put a full burn. I mean, you can get away with 4, but 5 is a really healthy spot to be at for me. But that's not a healthy spot to be at for my team. If I only have 5 healthy receivers, that's bad because that means I'm throwing walk-ons down there in my starting scout team against my defense. And my defense isn't getting to face stud young players like they are at Bama. I mean, the freshmen that came off the bench in the national title game that are really highly talented, some of those guys were who the defense was facing all year in practice, which helps make you better. And yeah, you're going to face those guys in one-on-ones during the week and some of the one-on, your good versus good periods or whatever they call them, which I always hated that expression. I'm like, so what? I'm not good if I'm not in that group. But it doesn't help your team, right? And so, yeah, it doesn't hurt you in regards to putting a game plan out and going out there and playing and all that, but it definitely does not help your football team to be that thin on numbers, even if you have enough to go out there and handle your business on a Saturday. Because it does make it tougher for your defense to prepare Monday to Thursday when you're facing, walk-ons. I will say this, however, I do think Notre Dame's in a unique situation because Vince and I have talked about this. If you saw Connor Radigan play in high school, that kid's a good football player. Master was a good football player in high school. Those guys aren't like when you think of the word walk-on, they're not Rudy, with all due respect. They're not guys who weren't even that good on their high school teams. Connor Radigan was a really good football player.
He was offsides, Brian.
I'm just ignoring that silly comment. So that it makes it a little bit different, but still there's a difference between Connor Radigan, with all due respect, and facing if they were going to get CJ Williams and Amorian Walker in practice because they signed those guys even if they weren't playing. And I think those were those issues can really hurt you. Irish Chi-Town asked the question, Brian, do you see Tobias Merriweather starting the season with the wide receiver depth concerns? Tobias will not start this year, most likely because of depth concerns. If Tobias starts this year, it's most likely going to be because he's just too good not to start. So I would want to reframe that a little bit, Ryan, to make it more to how I see the scenario. Do you have a response to either the question or to my answer to it?
It's a tough one for me because I think either way, Tobias Merriweather is going to play a lot this year. I agree with you. I think that it's going to be more about Tobias Merriweather just being that good than just a depth issue, right? Because the biggest thing for me is that the uncertainty of the W position, which is their boundary receiver, that is even a bigger concern than just the lack of depth, quote unquote, right? Because you have guys like Deion Colsey, who is really talented, but is he going to be able to fend off a guy like a Tobias Merriweather? Like, that's my biggest question mark, is that you don't have the for sure answer in the W, right? Like, that's my thing. So I think Tobias, that combined with his just pure talent, is the reasons, in my opinion, why Tobias Merriweather has a chance to start this year.
Ryan Loftus says, I'm not convinced Clemson will be that team. So, number one, Ryan, I think any conversations we've had about Clemson today have had to do with their defense.
It's fair.
And their defense is going to be outstanding this year. But that's because it matches up against the unit we're talking about today. We've also gone on record as saying we're not real high on the Clemson offense. I don't think it's necessarily schemed well. I don't think it's coached overly well. I question a lot of the new hires that Dabo made this offseason. He's putting a lot of faith in his former players. We'll see if that pans out or not. I don't like their starting quarterback, although I do love their backup. He's still just a freshman. I think their receiver talent's good, but not elite. Their offensive line is good. It's not great talent-wise. We'll see if Thomas Austin can coach it up. It's just a decent squad with questions at quarterback. I don't think they're going to dominate the ACC the way that they have in the past. So no one here is saying they're going to be that team.
No.
But their defense will be that defense. That is where I would disagree with Ryan, and that was the context of what today's conversation of Clemson was about.
I would also say this is that they weren't really that team last year, right? And what did they still went 10-2 or whatever they were, right? I mean,
which we predicted.
Sure. Right. They're a good football team. They have several players in that front seven, especially on defense, that are going to be first-round draft picks. Like, they are not overhyped on the defensive side of the football. The major question is, I don't think it could be quite as bad offensively as it was last year, because last year was awful. And there are some players on offense that you can get excited about, like Will Shipley, for instance. And like, we'll see what the quarterback position looks like. I agree with that completely. I tend to think that they'll be a better team than last year, but I still don't think they're going to be an elite football team. I don't. I think the offense has to take too much of a massive step up in one offseason for it to be to that level. So I agree with Brian that I don't think it's going to be the Clemson that we have seen in recent years. I think it's going to be better than last year, but I still don't think they're going to be a great team. I think they're going to be a good football team. And yeah, we'll take that for what it is.
Yep. Brian J. Irish says Notre Dame can end a lot of the debate with their talent image if they can beat Ohio State and or Clemson, win the big games, and everything else will fall into place. I would say they change that statement if they go 1-1 in those two games, and one of those games is a down-to-the-wire, four-quarter. They just, if it looked – I'll say this. If this season, if the Ohio State game is just like the Florida State game was in 2014 without the controversy, it's a legitimate, they beat you. They had the ball at the end. They scored. They beat you. But you gave them everything you could handle. And then you go beat Clemson in November, then, that debate's gone. As long as there's not like this huge, like you just fall apart, like you had Miami in 2017. As long as you can avoid that, I just think 1-1 with one of those games being a barn burner to me is enough for that to change. Because the talents change. It's the perception of the talent, which is what Brian is referring to there. I think, and if they go 2-0, Ryan, it's a dead argument. I mean, you win those two games, plus you have the number one recruiting class in the country. The argument's over. I mean, it's just not there anymore.
I mean, even if a program has a really good team, it's hard to just go 2-0 against Ohio State and Clemson in a given year, right? Like, that's that's two of the best teams in college
for anybody,
football.
For Bama, for anybody.
Yes.
You beat Ohio State at Ohio State and Clemson and USC at USC. I mean, yeah.
I mean, again, because we even forget to mention here, Brian, right? It's like we just talked about that Clemson was down last year. Well, they lost to the national championships. What was it, 10-7 or some crazy score like that?
Right. Clemson Georgia game.
Clemson Georgia
10-3.
Yeah, 10-3. So Clemson was in a very competitive football game. It was an ugly football game. There's no doubt, but it wasn't like Georgia just went in and manhandled Clemson. Like it was a competitive football game. So I think that if Notre Dame ends the year 11-1 and you look at a split 1-1, I think that you can say that Notre Dame has gotten to that level to your degree, right? But it has to be competitive football in losses. That is to your point, right? Like it can't be a 30-3 loss again. It can't be a 42-14. Like it can't be like one
Right.
of those types of
Even a
outcomes. It has to be
35-20 where you're just not really like, even if it's a similar game to 2015 where you lost by 17, but it's like, even though Notre Dame in the second half like scored to make it 28-21, you're just like, okay, well, how's this going to go down there and score? You knew you were going to win that game. You knew they were the better team. They were clearly the better team. Even a game like that, where it's only a 17-point loss, Ryan, would add to that perception, right? I mean, because like Bama goes on and gets curb stomped by Clemson, and it's just a bad game for Bama. Because it was. That's just abnormal. That's not normally how things go for Alabama. But for Notre Dame, it's like, oh, well, here we go again. You just don't belong in the field there. So I think even a game like that, where just even a 17, 14-point game where the other team was just clearly better than you, I think fuels that conversation. A blowout, definitely. A blowout makes it to where even beating Clemson doesn't change anything. Clemson's
100%.
not the team that they were. Because that's exactly what they'll say. Clemson's not the team they've been in the past.
Right.
And they'll be right. That's why you need that, either a win over Ohio State and a close loss to Clemson, or a really competitive loss to Ohio State and a win over Clemson.
And I think someone in the chat said you also need to score, right? Like I think that a lot of the negativity is about if the offense can show up in a big game. And I agree with that. I do. I agree with that. I don't think that you can, like, even if if you lose 17-7 or 17-10, I don't think it changes their perception as much, because the offense has been the one for the most part that hasn't shown up in the big game. That is absolutely true.
Because if you beat, let's just say Notre Dame beats Clemson the way that Georgia did last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the questions that you have about this offense are not going away.
100%.
Understandably so. And they shouldn't. Next question, Irish Chi-Town. I'm going to ask you this, Ryan. How would Steve Angeli do if he had to start this year? Because I think so much of that has to do with the questions that we talked about today.
Right. So this is the thing, right? I think that what makes Tyler Buckner such a attractive option as a quarterback is that I think that he can make a lot of players around him better if he's clicking, right? If everything is kind of moving in the right direction. I do think Steve Angeli can operate in an offense where everything around him is going well early on in his career, right? Like I think that if the wide receivers are playing well, they have some after catch ability, you're able to just get the football out of your hands quick, you have a solid running game, I think that he could function in that offense. I just don't think that he necessarily is going. I definitely don't think that he's going to elevate the players around him. So to your point, Brian, it's if you throw him in at the beginning of the year, and let's say the wide receivers are still getting their bearings, offensive line is getting better, but it's not the best offensive line that we're going to see during the year. I think that Steve Angeli could struggle because they're going to force him into trying to beat them, right? Like that's the worry that I have. But if everything's clicking, I think that he's not going to kill you. It's just he's not going to necessarily elevate anybody early on in his career.
Right. Can he manage a really good season like Matt LaVecchio? He's better than Matt LaVecchio was.
Sure.
Right. But yeah, he's going to be just get the ball out to your dudes, and that would have to be it. Irish Chi-Town says, Brian, how much input do you see Coach Freeman having calling offensive plays during games? I actually think he'll have some, but it'll be differently than you think. So what I think it'll be is more of he'll be sort of that bridge between the offense and defense. Hey, Tommy, listen, defense is gassed, right? I need you to slow it down a little bit this next series, right? Like sometimes big picture, it's not necessarily ideal to have a 2-play 80-yard drive for a touchdown. Now, of course, you take it, but it's like, defense, get back out there, because you may just give it back because your defense is gassed, right? And so I think it'll be some of that kind of stuff. I think that if Coach Reese and Coach Freeman have the relationship I think and hope that they have, there will be times where, like, hey, look, Coach, what are you seeing in this defense? Like, we're having a hard time with this. What are you seeing? Hey, Tommy, so I think it'll be kind of like that kind of thing, but I think it's going to be more so with both sides of the ball is, hey, hey, Al, we need this right here, right? Like we need you guys to, on this kind of thing to help the offense out, or hey, and more so the offense. Hey, Tommy, we need to come out this next series and just maybe slow the tempo down because our guys just need a breather. That other team is going up tempo and our guys are gassed, or late for second quarter, hey, we got the ball. We need to go on our 4-minute offense because we need to not have to put the defense back on the field to let them recover from the tempo of the first half of the heat. And then they also get halftime. So it'd be stuff like that is where he would have a say on play calling. Not so much, hey, Tommy, I want to run double post with a mini wheel from the back out of the backfield here. It may be like, hey, Tommy, I'm watching this. Are you seeing what they're doing here with their backs? Yeah, coach, I got it. Or no, what do you? Yeah, when you guys do this, their backside safety walks down. I would like to see that kind of stuff, as long as they have. There's a time and a place for that. Where Tommy's trying to make a call and the head coach is jumping on, hey, do this. That would be happened in the past. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be more of just kind of the bridging the two sides of the ball. Anything you want to add to that, Ryan?
Well, I was just thinking about for a second, do you think that defensive players for teams, I'm thinking about like the Chip Kelly Oregon team or a Colt Brennan Hawaii team, the defensive players are at any point are like, guys, can you stop scoring so darn quick, man? Can you please just stop
please catch
doing
a breath?
This?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I agree, though. I think the pace of the game is a big talking point for me, right? It's like, to your point. It's like, let's slow it down here. Let's pick it up here. Are you seeing this? I don't think it's necessarily him calling plays, that type of input. I think it's more understanding what point of the game you are, because that's what an in-game coach is supposed to be, right? That's what a head coach is supposed to, those situations, and understand when to switch stuff up. So I think that you're correct in that regard.
Next question here is from Marcel. What's up, fam? What's the deal with Jabron Payne? Is he just rehabbing? Is he available this season? He's available. My understanding is he's healthy. He's been going through workouts. It's just kind of like you're not going to really know what to get from him, Marcel, until you see him with pads on. Because, I was talking with somebody the other day, and it's just like, haven't seen the kid take a healthy snap of football since a sophomore year of high school.
Right.
So what he's doing running around in shorts and stuff doesn't really tell you a whole lot. So he's going to need some time because he hasn't really played a lot of football. I mean, he rushed for like a little over 200 yards last year. Got hurt in the first game of his junior year. He hadn't played a lot of football. So I think he's going to need some time. But Marcel, I don't think that's rehabbing as much as just getting his legs back underneath him and getting kind of back into the flow of playing football at the level he used to. And I hope he can get back to being that guy that he was as a sophomore, because he was a pretty good player back then. Irish Chi-Town, Ryan, which offensive player who is not a projected starter do you see making the most impact?
It's a good question. Not projected as being a starter that I think can make the most impact. I mean, I think that there's a few guys, if I'm being honest, right? Like, I mean, let me just take a couple of the skill position players, for instance. I think that if Chris Tyree is the starting running back, I think Audric Estime is going to have a huge impact offensively. I think that one of the wide receivers, it could be Tobias Merriweather. If he is not the starter early on, he can make a huge impact. And then I think a quiet impact could be a couple of the offensive linemen that had a lot of playing time last year, but now we're more of kind of those swing players behind the scene. Like, I think that if Andrew Kristofic is not a starter, that I think that he is a vital player for this offense, because I think he can back up guard. I think he plays center. He even played tackle early on in his career. Not saying that he's going to be the backup tackle, but he gives you a little bit of alignment versatility, which I think can be huge on a unit that, I mean, Jared Patterson's had some injuries. Josh Lugg's had some injuries. Zeke Correll's had some injuries. There might be some spots where maybe Andrew Kristofic needs to come in and he needs to fill a void and fill a role. So I think that he is a vital player to this offense from a depth perspective up front.
Archer has the question, and we were talking about comparing Lorenzo Styles to Jackson Smith and Jigba. He said, how many snaps did Lorenzo play last year versus those other guys? I know Jackson Smith and Jigba's freshman year was COVID year, and he was sitting behind Olave, Wilson, and Williams. So Jackson Smith and Jigba played 162 snaps as a freshman. Lorenzo played 249. That's only basically one full game more. However, 65 of Lorenzo came in the last game of the year. If you even take that game out, which gets them about 12 snaps apart, Lorenzo still had 16 catches for over 200 yards, which far surpasses the production that Jackson Smith and Jigba had. So even if you take out the bowl game, that puts them on about an even playing field from a snap standpoint. Lorenzo still produced more. And again, don't take that as some kind of insult to Jackson Smith and Jigba. I don't think the point you're getting. It's more of you don't need to have played a ton of snaps the year before to then break out the next year. And if Notre Dame fans were in a situation where they had a Jackson Smith and Jigba coming off a year in which he had 10 catches for 47 yards, they wouldn't have been excited like, oh, he's about to break out and have 90 catches for 1,600 yards. That's where we were coming from on that. Roy Boy, there was a conversation raging during the chat about Nick Saban, and I only caught part of it. And I want to address this. Somebody said Nick Saban didn't have a lot of success up north, and I'm going to disagree with that. So, first of all, his first head coaching job was at Toledo in 1990. He went 9-2 and tied for the lead in the MAC. He took over a Michigan State team that was honestly not really good, and his overall record isn't great. But remember, he took over a team the year before under George Perlis and went 0-11. And they went to a bowl game his first 3 years. They went 6-6 in 1998, and then the last year they went 10-2. So he rebuilt that program. There's no doubt about it. Like he did well there. There was another question I want to address too. People talking about the LSU and how many titles. Pete Carroll won 2 titles. If you count the way they were given back then, where the AP and the coaches poll both hand out titles. So USC won the title outright in 2004. In 2003, LSU won the title from the coaches. USC won the title from the AP. So Nate Saban actually at LSU only won like a half a title, if we're going to use it the same way that we compare it to like Michigan or the Georgia Tech Colorado from 1990. He only won the coaches title that year of the major championships that are handed out. And USC and Pete Carroll in 2003 won the AP, because at the time they were not tied into you didn't have to vote for I believe the AP did not vote for the BCS championship because that game was LSU and Oklahoma. So I believe the coaches poll just kind of gave it to whoever won that, but the AP was not beholden to that because of the fact that Oklahoma had no business playing. It should have been USC versus LSU. Oklahoma had no business playing in the national title game in 2003. They got beat 35-7 by Kansas State in the Big 12 title game and still finished in the top 2. So when people talk about go back to the BCS was garbage, like garbage. Again, Oklahoma lost 35-7 to Kansas State in the Big 12 title game and still got in over USC that year. That's just stupid. I mean, USC was clearly the second best team that year. UCLA had a loss early in the year in 2003. They lost in September to Cal in 3 overtimes and then went on. They beat number six Auburn at the time, beat an SEC team on the road 23-0. And then also that year beat Washington State 43-16. And Washington State at the time was ranked 6th. Washington State that year under Mike Price finished in the top 10 and they curb stomped them. And most of their games all year after this Cal game were not competitive. Like that should have been LSU versus USC. And with all due respect to Nick Saban's football team, they do not beat USC in the title game. They do not. So that would definitely not have been an ideal situation for LSU. The other thing is somebody said that LSU had 2 losses that year. No, they didn't. That's the 2007 team that won it with Les Miles. Nick Saban's team only had 1 loss. They lost 19-7 at home to Florida. It's the 2007 team that won it with 2 losses. They beat Ohio State in the championship game. Beat that Beanie Wells Ohio State team in the championship game. I think Beanie, he got hurt in the first half, didn't he? He didn't even play in the second half, I don't think.
He may have.
Yeah.
He was a good player, man.
He was. He definitely was. Was it 2006? The Michigan-Ohio State game, that great Michigan-Ohio State game, and he took that ball around midfield and just ripped it, just housed it.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
So 99 problems, BK1. Do you see a possibility that Tobias could be the X, Colsey the W, and Styles the Z? Or do you think it's more likely that Styles is the X, Tobias the W, and Lindsey Davis at the Z? It just depends, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, could we see a starting lineup with Colsey and Tobias in it? It's possible. That one would surprise me a little bit more, to be honest with you.
Right.
I don't even think it, but I don't think it's a given that if Tobias and if Tobias is in the starting lineup, with Styles and or Lindsey or Davis, he'll be the W. But don't be surprised if maybe there's some roles where he's playing X and somebody else like a Jaden Thomas or Deion Colsey's playing W at times. But Tobias is going to start out his career at W. I want to make sure I'm clear. He's going to start out his career at W. I'm not saying he's going to be the starter at W.
If Colsey and Tobias are on the field, that is a massive wide receiver room.
Yeah.
Do you tend to think, Brian, that it's going to look a lot smaller than that comparatively? Like,
More often than not. Yeah.
More often than not, yeah.
I would honestly have some 12 personnel stuff where I do put both of them on the field together. I would just play big boy football for a series. Just, hey, back shoulder it and read zones and all that other kind of stuff and go from there. Somebody said that Kenny Minchie's not a 4-star. Yes, he is. Kenny Minchie is a 4-star recruit, actually. And I believe it's at least one service has him in the top 200. Correct, Ryan? So,
I believe so. Yep.
Yes, yep. Kenny Minchie is ranked as the number 179 player in the country by ESPN. He's also ranked as a 4-star by On3 as the number 276 player in the country. 247 Sports also ranks him as a 4-star on their composite and their consensus. So only Rivals doesn't rank him as a 3-star recruit. So you're not going to want to be on the side of Rivals here contending that he's not a 4-star recruit because it's not accurate.
He's a good player, man.
He's a very good player, yes.
Yeah.
Michael S. with a super chat. Thank you, Michael. What are the new rules regarding the transfer portal? Only one transfer without penalty or multiple transfers allowed? So just to clear up some of the stuff that's been going around, there was a proposal made that they allow unlimited transfers, which my response was, if I told you I had a source, this is not true, I'm making a hypothetical. If I told you, Ryan, I have on good authority that the leadership of the NCAA is purposely trying to destroy their own institution, what would they do differently than what they've done the last 3 or 4 years?
That's a good question, man. That's a good question.
They literally proposed to just like you're having this big problem with players getting under the table. So now you're just going to make it even easier so kids can just literally transfer a kid could literally go into the portal every year if he wanted to and just open himself up for new NIL deals every freaking year. Well, it's professional. You can't do that in the NFL. There's no professional sport that allows you to do that. You have contracts. You have to honor them, right? I mean, so it's just so absurd. It's like, just kill yourselves already, meaning like as an institution. Just if you don't want to be involved in this anymore, just bow out. Hey, look, you do you in football, and we're just going to handle everything else. But the fact that the NCAA proposed this, it's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. But it has not passed. They actually said we're going to wait on it. So as of right now, it's still just a one-time transfer rule. After the second time you transfer, you have to sit out. I think the one-time transfer rule is stupid. There needs to be exceptions. But I've laid them out before, but I think it's absolutely stupid. And allowing kids to transfer however often, is one of the stupidest things the NCAA has ever done. And that's saying something because they've done a lot of stupid things, especially the last 5 years.
You're not wrong.
It's a joke organization. It really is. Corey D with a super chat. Thank you, Corey. Hey, Brian. Well, it's August. Any news regarding the uniforms? Man, I'm going to be honest with you, Corey. Did you read the 2 intel pieces that I put out yesterday and today? Do you think anyone or myself really cared about asking about, are the uniforms going to look different? I understand that this is important to you, but honestly, it's just not on the top of my list. And I only get so many opportunities with my sources to get intel. I'm not going to use one of my bullets on what the uniform's going to look like. Because I don't care. There's nothing I can do about it. And so, and I understand it's important to you, Corey. I'm not being disrespectful to you. It's just, I'm just not going to ask. I just don't care. And so it's never something that when I'm talking like, oh, I knew what I meant to ask you. Are you guys having new uniforms this year? Honestly, I don't care. I doubt they're going to look much different this year. I doubt. I hope they do. I hope they change the color of the pants. I just don't know.
Brian, you're awesome, man. You're so funny.
Thanks. I don't mean to be disrespectful because I love Corey. Corey's a great, he's been around from the beginning of this whole thing. It's just, I don't care. And I only get so much time with the sources that I have. That's just not something that I'm gonna. Hey, sorry I couldn't get any updates on Keon Keeley or the team, but I spent my whole time talking about the new uniforms.
I'll DM Marcus Freeman and ask him.
Yeah,
I got you, Corey.
Right, I love you, Corey. It's just not something that ever pops in my head, man. And I really don't mean that as a disrespectful thing to you. Ryan Loftus with a super chat. Thank you, Ryan. What will in Notre Dame's blue chip ratio be if they land Alsbury, Minchie, and Edwards the coming few days? I don't know what the blue chip ratio is. Do you have any idea what that is?
I'm not sure what it is either. I mean, I guess, is he asking which one of these kids do we consider blue chip, if any?
I have no idea.
Is that what the
I've
question
never heard
is?
of the blue chip ratio before.
I'm not sure either. Ryan, if you want to pop it in to the chat and just explain what you mean by that, would love to answer it. Just not 100% sure.
I don't know what that means. All I know is they'll have the number 1 ranked class. That's all I know.
Yes.
Adam says, Brian, and Adam, I did see your comments about Lou, and I'm not going to bring him up because I just don't feel like I don't deserve that. So lose my guy, but I do. It means a lot for me to what you said, Brian. Do you think the transfer rules will ever go back to what it was? Have to sit out a year and have a case? Not on the NCAA. The NCAA is so cowering in fear of being sued that they're just letting you do whatever. This is why they're not. Oh, the NCAA needs to step in. They're not, because they're afraid they're going to get sued. And there's just feckless leadership. They're a bunch of cowards that just honestly should be embarrassed for what they've done to a great sport for decades. For decades. It's just now all kind of coming home to roost for them now. But their greed and stupidity and just lack of competent people in positions of authority has been has destroyed, in my opinion, a great game. Changes were needed, and instead of adapting those changes and then avoiding things like the Austin lawsuit and the O'Bannon lawsuit and other things, they allowed it to get to that point. And once they finally lost, they were so afraid because they won lawsuit after law. I mean, they won in the courts all the time. And then the first time they lost big, they just turned into a bunch of little freaking cowards. And I said, fine, we'll let everything happen. And every single one of those people that's in any way involved in leadership of the NCAA should be fired immediately and replaced with competent people who are willing to take a stand. And you know what? Who else is responsible? The presidents of the schools, because you're allowing this to happen. Because really, at the end of the day, the institutions make up the NCAA. And they're all a bunch of cowards, and they don't care about young people. Haven't for a long time. They care about one thing and one thing only: making money. And that's a sad thing. So many things I used to be so against, unionizing players. For my life, stupid, right? But now it's like you're signing these billion-dollar deals. You're making USC and UCLA fly across the freaking country for lacrosse so you can make all this money off football. And I'm supposed to just say, no, the players don't deserve their cut. At this point in time, you're destroying everything that makes this sport unique for greed. So you know what? Why shouldn't the players get a cut of that? And I used to be against that. I used to be very much against that. But now, the way that they're going about things, Ryan, why not? Why not? You're letting everything else go on. Why not?
Yeah.
And it's sad. And I get a little fired up about it in case you haven't noticed.
I mean, it's very sad. On a slightly lighter note, so a couple people in the chat chimed in, Brian. Apparently, the blue chip ratio is the percentage of 5 stars and 4 stars in a class.
Okay.
Or on a roster. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'd have to do the math. I don't have an answer. All I know is it'll be the number 1 ranked class at the point, and it'll be a guaranteed top 3 to 4 class, in my opinion. So, other than that, I have no idea. All right, so here we go with some more. Justin Hancock. Actually, let's go down here to Mark E. Stewart. Mark with the super chat. Thank you, Mark. What are your Mark? You and I are gonna have words after this, buddy. What do your sources think about the uniform bands? See, Mark's my guy. So if you knew, Mark's my guy. So I love you, Mark. You guys do a great job. Hopefully, we get good news tonight. Thanks for the super chat, Mark. I'm gonna send you a DM as soon as this show's over for that comment. Justin Hancock, Brian, will you be giving your halftime analysis each game on the board? I enjoyed reading your thoughts on Twitter. Just didn't know if you would put it on the board. Yeah, so I did not put my I did not put my analysis of games on Twitter last year. I used to just kind of do that every play, just kind of give my thoughts. Once we launched the premium board, I pretty much went away from that. And it's now going to be a premium thing. Twitter does not pay me. They don't generate hardly any revenue at all. The way that Twitter's algorithms are, they make it very hard to really make money off of them. For example, Facebook, for example, produces way more page views, clicks to our site when we publish stories on Facebook than Twitter does.
That's
Way
crazy to
more.
think about. That's
Yeah,
really
way
crazy to think
more.
about. Huh.
And Twitter just tries to make it harder for you to put your own stuff. It's all about them making their money. So I just have no respect for Twitter in many different ways, and they don't really do anything to help me grow my business. And so I just don't put that kind of stuff out there for free anymore. So to be on the message board, and so Justin, to your point, I will be giving like a halftime recap, and then of course my post-game observations article, but I'll also just be kind of giving my thoughts as the game goes along. And we did a live thread every game last year, and we'll do that again this year. I'm thinking about doing something to where there's a thread that is where people can contact in, but then also a thread that maybe can be attached that's just us sharing our stuff. I've had people request that. It's like, hey, can you lock the chat so only you guys can comment? I'm like, well, that's not fun because I want people to be able to share their thoughts and opinions too.
Mhm.
But I also understand that some people just they want to see what we have to say. So we're still working through that of kind of what exactly our in-game content is going to look like. Somebody asked if we're going to be doing post-game shows, Brian. Yes, we will. We will definitely be having post-game shows. Obviously, this year it won't just be me and Vince. We'll have Ryan on some of the post-game shows. We'll have Sean Davis on some of the post-game shows. The only person that won't be on most of the post-game shows is Sean Stiers, because he's the beat writer, and so he'll be doing interviews and stuff like that. He may pop on at times, but he won't be there for that exclusively at that point in time. So that is what we are doing. So that is going to be it, Ryan, for today's show. I thank everybody for being a part of the show today. Thank you all for just everything. Obviously, we've had a ton of signups the last week on the message board, so we're growing. People getting ready for the season. If you haven't done so, you got to do it. So go to boards.irishbreakdown.com. Check out what we have to offer. Hit that like button, everybody. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Let me see here. Oh, we had a super chat here from Michael S. I want to get in. It says, Kelly around the bowl game last year said that Notre Dame would be a continuous top 5 recruiter. Did he ever do anything to make that real or just talking? And that was what Brian Kelly always did. He just talked. He said what he needed to say and then just, talk. Like when he said the players wanted Jeff Quinn as the offensive line coach. No, they didn't. For Sean AL Flip, another super chat for Sean. I read somewhere that Jack Swarbrick was next for NCAA president. Any insight? That was true a couple years ago. I think Jack Swarbrick's at the point now where Jack Swarbrick saved the NCAA, in my opinion, about a decade ago when the original super conference conversation happened. And you had Texas and Oklahoma were talking about leaving for the Pac-12. Talking about how things change in a relatively short period of time. The Pac-12 was trying to steal Texas and Oklahoma. So they started all this. And what happened is Jack stepped in and did a lot behind the scenes to save that. Now, I think with what the NCAA is doing, I think Jack, this is just my opinion and just talking to some sources, this isn't something Jack Swarbrick's ever said or someone that's necessarily, that repeating what Jack has said, but just some things I've heard. I believe that Jack's at the point now where he's totally fine letting the NCAA die and a new entity taking its place. And now that might be something he might want to be a part of. But I think now he realizes the NCAA is dead and there's no one there to save it. So instead of trying to take charge of a dying institution, be a part of killing the institution and then building up its replacement the way you think it should be done. I think that would be something that would interest Jack Swarbrick a whole lot more than being the next NCAA president. So, but that is a very good question and something that we've heard people talk about before in the past. Now we're definitely done. Okay, so everybody, thank you so much for being a part of what we're doing today. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. And as Ryan said earlier, sign up for the message boards. I promise you, you will not regret it. Boards@irishbreakdown.com. Have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you again soon, 6 o'clock, right? We'll talk to you then, and then we'll talk to you again at 7:30. So everybody have a great, great rest of your day. We'll see you again very, very soon at 7:30 for the Irish Breakdown podcast, talking about Jaden Osbury's pending decision definitely be there for that on the Irish Breakdown podcast.